My name's Gary Stevenson. In 2011, I was Citibank's most profitable trader in the world. This is everything I'm authorized to tell you about being a trader of one of the world's biggest banks. You become the best trader in the world for one of the biggest banks in the world, and then somebody sits you down and threatens you basically like a gangster. It kind of makes you realize that they're the same people. When I started working, it was this kind of a bit of a mad environment. I'm always reminded of, you know, when you hear footballers talk about, like, footballers from like the 90s and the 2000s talking about when they came through and the stupid like hazing rituals and stuff. Like, on my first week, they made me buy like 100 burgers and carry them up and like give them around the trading floor, this kind of thing. But there was a lot of that kind of nonsense going on, and there was a lot of people getting taken out to expensive restaurants and clubs and taken out to holidays. I got taken to Vegas when I was 21 before I went to Jay-Z's after party in LA, and then I went to Carmen Electra's birthday party. I hadn't even started working full time. And one of the nights, I can't even remember, it must have been like $20,000 or $30,000 one night in a Vegas club. To me, it was really weird because, you know, I come from a very poor background, and like, I was in a VIP table in LA with a bunch of like 35-year-olds who were paying girls who looked just like the girls I used to hang out with at uni to hang out with them, you know what I mean? My specific desk started to make enormous amounts of money, which was like, it was really crazy for me. I was like super young, and like some of the guys I was working with, like pretty crazy guys, and they started getting like really big for their boots, and one of the guys immediately got one of their secretaries pregnant, like within like a week. What it meant was the amount of money we were getting paid just for sitting in our seats went up a lot, which meant that you could afford to lose a lot of money without it appearing like you were losing a lot of money. So for example, if you're making 100 grand a day for the bank, just for sitting in your seat, you can afford to lose 100 grand a day on bad bets and not actually be officially losing money. Obviously, I know now that there's like this massive stereotype that traders take cocaine. So I was expelled from school for selling £3 worth of cannabis when I was just turned 16. And I was like, that's it, no more drugs, I'm off drugs, no more drugs ever again. So I've never taken cocaine in my life. And you know, I turn up in the place, everyone's like going out partying till like 2 a.m, 3 a.m, and getting to work at 5 in the morning. And I was like, how the f do these guys do it? You know, they're older than me as well. But by my late 20s, some of my mates were taking cocaine. And they were doing that thing that people on cocaine do, where they talk like just at you a lot really quickly, and they're being really boring, but they don't notice they're doing it. And then, of course, that is what my whole career had been like. And then I realised, like, f me, were those guys just on cocaine the whole time? And then since then, one of my colleagues, who is very upset about the book, came out and said, like, I think he said he was spending £80,000 a year on cocaine. Yeah, which is... But the funniest thing is, like, I had no idea it was happening. I had no idea it was happening. I thought he was an alcoholic. Probably the maddest thing was, again, this guy Rupert, from a very rich background, but he really took to me really quickly. And, you know, sometimes I feel bad about the way I portray him, because he really was good to me. He really, like, sponsored my career, drove me through, and he would take me out, like, with all of his mates. And he lived in Clapham and I lived in Ilford, which is, like, totally opposite ends of London. And he'd take me out with all his Clapham mates, and like we'd be going to f***ing Movida, which is a big expensive club, and like expensive restaurants, and you know. He'd normally let me go like around midnight, because otherwise I'd miss the last train and he'd have to pay for a taxi. But he was like, no, stay. He kept me out later and later. In the end, ended up staying around his place. I woke up, I felt like I went into the office, I just threw up. I had to go to the bathroom, just threw up. And the boss sent me home. The next day I came in early. And the boss was like, oh, did Rupert do that to you? And I just laughed, you know. Then when Rupert came in, the boss goes to him, Gary said, you did that to him. And I knew that he'd be furious, right? And at the time, he used to sit 2 seats to the left of me, but there was an empty seat between us. And I just thought, like, don't look at him, just don't look at him. But I could kind of feel him like burning into my cheek. And then I start to hear, like, at first, just kind of like a gentle growling. Like a growling in the back, like a like this, and then I just think, just don't look at him, don't look at him. And it starts to get like louder, like this growling gets like louder and louder. He's on the trading floor in front of everyone. I'm just thinking, then I hear like this bang, this big bang, right? And then I think like, I'd better turn around now because like, what the has he done? And we used to have like, all the computer stations were like behind these doors, and he'd kick the door, so it like smashed into the brackets, and he was just kicking like that. And he was turned around in his chair, like leaning over towards me, like that, like that, like gnashing his teeth like a dog at me and growling at me. And I just looked at him, and he did it for about, it must have been at least 10 seconds, just like growling, gnashing his teeth at me in front of everyone. And then I just looked back, and then he just started the growling, started to just chill, and then he just kept on with his work. And he never mentioned it again. That was it. There's these brokers who kind of match the traders together, and their job is to help you get deals done, you know. You say, I want to buy here, and they're supposed to find a seller. But in reality, what they were doing a lot of is basically taking people out, taking people to, and they had this kind of really interesting skill of they know what you like. So, you know, one of the guys wanted to go to like fancy restaurants and drink red wine. Another guy wants to get like VIP tables at fancy nightclubs. Another guy wants to get taken on holidays. Another guy wants to go to sports events. But the truth is, when I got taken out by these guys, even when I went to Vegas, we were going to like celeb parties in LA and Vegas. For me, it was work. It was just work. And I was just trying to sort of be the Gary that these guys wanted me to be. And it was quite fun. I didn't really realise. Because most people that go in there now come from rich backgrounds. Their dad was rich, their mum was rich, their friends are rich. All their mates have similar jobs. All their mates go to these VIP clubs, you know, they're booking tables and they're going to fancy restaurants. For them, it's just part of their social scene. But for me, it was totally taking me out of the social scene I was from. So I kind of hated it, to be honest. And plus there's this weird thing that happens where like brokers will take you to like, I remember they took me to watch England, my first England game. And then the next day they're like, oh, can you do this deal for me? And then you realise like, oh, there's a kind of like hidden little quid pro quo here, which I wasn't really comfortable with. So eventually, like, I started to just like say, look, I don't meet no brokers. I don't go for no dinners. I instituted Nando's only rule. So for Americans who don't know what Nando's is a popular grilled chicken chain. I said, if you want to meet Gary, we go to Nando's Canary Wharf. I pay for me, you pay for you. That's the rule. But then I was like the biggest trader in like one of the biggest traders in the world. So like so many people wanted to go to Nando's for me. I was eating Nando's every day. So I just sort of like cut it off, and I became very antisocial actually. I think people realise like Gary's just not this kind of kid. You know, he doesn't want like. I think, you know, the brokers, the traders maybe are not socially aware to realise it, but the brokers, because their job is kind of party people, and also a lot of the brokers come from poorer backgrounds and come from my neck of the woods. They realise very quickly Gary is just here pretending to have a good time so that other traders have a good time, because that's exactly what they're doing. And they realise like, listen, Gary just doesn't really want, this is not his game really, and they sort of let me get away from that. These guys are mainly people who couldn't cut it as traders, so they tried to like climb the greasy pole. And what they make their money on is basically internal politics. The kind of person who decides to make their money managing internal politics in an investment bank is usually a bit of a The management is just like, it's just an absolute cesspool, really. I remember talking, my manager's manager, who in the book we called the Slug, I remember talking to like one of my mates on another trading desk. And he was like, I'll tell you what, if he was your intern, you wouldn't hire him, would you? So I became the Swiss franc trader when I was 22, which is really, really young. And the way it happened was, my boss, who was a Swiss franc trader, quit. And a new boss got put in. And he was a really nice guy, but he seemed a little bit kind of like dopey in a way. And he come over once to introduce himself to me. And the way he introduced himself to me was he just sat down next to me and he pulled out a copy of Sports Illustrated. And he flicked through the magazine. Like, he opens it like that to me. He's like, do you like that? And I was like, yeah, it's nice. And he's like, did the whole one at a time. Just like that. He didn't even say hi, he didn't even say his name. And then I figured out this guy must be the new boss. But then he stood up and he said to me, what's your job on the desk then? And I was thinking like, yeah, I'm the desk junior, right? And I was thinking like, surely he knows what my job is. And there's this kind of moment where I'm looking at him and he's looking at me. And I'm thinking like, and I told him I'm the Swiss franc trader, which was my old boss's job. And he was just like, oh, right, okay. All right, fine. I love my second boss, but he was totally insane. I remember once he sat me down just like, Gary, I really need to apologise. And I was like, what for? And he was like, we can't give you a salary increase. And I'd never even asked for one. And the previous year I'd been paid £400,000. And he seemed genuinely worried about whether I could survive on it. You know, and then I just said to him, yeah, it's really tough. What else can you say to these guys? Yeah, another time my boss threw a phone at my colleague's head because my colleague had got angry and he'd thrown his phone at his screens. But obviously, like now with these LCD screens, they don't like smash. So he was like, it just got, and then so he picked up the phone, smashing it on the desk, and then he started trying to trade through the same phone. So he was like, hitting these like, Johnny, what's 3 months? Oh. But he wasn't working, and then he was just shouting, and then he just banging his phone. So then my boss shouted over to him like, what's wrong? And he obviously wasn't listening. And then he asked me what's wrong, and I said, I think JB's phone's broken. So this boss just went over to the end, just picked up a phone and just like lobbed it in the air, landed on this guy's head. And then the weirdest thing is it totally calmed him down. Totally effectively calmed the guy down. Yeah, I don't know. The only thing I ever saw get escalated to HR was a guy who stole money from another trader. And even that, there was a general consensus on the desk that he shouldn't have escalated to HR, that we should have dealt with it between us. Yeah, it was like that. There was there's just like a kind of pirate ship vibe about it. Like, it's a very masculine way of like, we sort it out between us. We don't go to HR. Because the truth is, a lot of people do dodgy shit. A lot of people get away with it because if you're making money on it, management, maybe it's changed, but management are not going to ask. I was making a ton of money, tons of money. Nobody ever asked how I was making it. Management never asked how I was making it because if you're doing something dodgy, they would rather that just to slide. They're going to get paid on it rather than to find out. When you lose money, a lot of stress gets placed on you. The worst thing, from my perspective and from the perspective of many traders, is that you're no longer allowed to trade. And that's what traders want to do. They want to trade. It only happened to me once. I was only once ever in the red, which was in my second full year as a trader in 2010. So I was 23. I'd put a big bet on, which had some risk to Swiss interest rates. And the Swiss central bank suddenly cut rates to -4.5% for some crazy reason. Specifically using the product that I was betting on. I lost $8 million in a week. The maddest thing about it was the right bet. If I was allowed to keep that position, I would have made it all back. But I wasn't allowed to keep that position. So you end up $4 million in the red and you have to fight your way out of it. I'm pretty sure my salary was 36K when I first started, which was a good salary for the time. It's not even a bad salary even now. P&L is profit and loss. And it's the only thing that matters in the world if you're a trader, basically. And every single day, every week, every month, every year, your individual P&L is calculated. Everyone's individual P&L is calculated. And it goes around on a spreadsheet every day. So every day you get a spreadsheet that tells you every single trader's P&L, which obviously means like if you're the best trader, you're the best trader. But if you're losing money, everybody can see. It's very clear who the best is and it's very clear who the worst is. And that starts to become how you interact with other people and it starts to become how you see other people. There's this kind of beautiful fairness to it, in a weird way. And I think there's not a lot of places in the world, other than sort of the football pitch, where a kid like me, from nowhere, can come in and compete with all of these multimillionaires from rich families and be like the guy at 24. Traders in my department were getting paid about 7% of their P&L, but I didn't know that at first. And there's this kind of idea like you can't ask anyone what their bonus is, so it was like really mysterious. And then this thing happened after my first bonus at the beginning of 2010, when I got paid nearly £400,000, which would be like, at the time, maybe $700,000. So much more than I've been expecting. And it kind of broke me a little bit. And I just became like, oh my God, there's so much money to be made here. This is it, all we're doing now is trading. And then obviously the next year I lost this $8 million in a week really quickly. And that just again beat me, like you have to be better, you have to be more serious, you have to work harder. And I just became like this machine. Most of the traders, in my opinion, were not making huge amounts of money from taking risky positions, speculative positions. They were making most of their money from the customers. But they're kind of trying to pretend they're making it from their bets. But most traders want to be making money from betting, because that's sort of the glamorous side of it, you know, like, you know, can you actually beat the market? It wasn't really till 2011 that I started to make some big bets. You know, like I always remember in 2011, the Japanese nuclear disaster. I made a ton of money on the Japanese nuclear disaster, not because I'd been expecting it to be a Japanese nuclear disaster, but because I was betting on economic weakness. You bet on economic weakness, this crazy thing happens that there's no way you could have predicted. You make a ton of money. Well, some people the other way around, right? You know, some people would have lost a ton of money on the nuclear disaster. People sometimes turn around to me and they say, oh, it's terrible that you made money betting on these things happening. And, you know, I made money from the Japanese earthquake, right? 20,000 people died in that earthquake, in the following tsunami. I didn't make that tsunami happen. I think that's important to realise. And these guys' job is to bet on it and to be right on it. And they're very, very heavily incentivised to be right. The payment structure is very weird, or at least it was back then. You would get paid a lot of money in a bonus, but it would be like deferred. So you get this money in 4 years. Since I left banking, this rule came in, this EU law that limited bonuses as a multiple of salary, which meant that the way payment happened is completely changed. Now, because of that bonus cap, what they will have to do instead is they massively increase your salary. And since then, salaries have increased massively and bonuses have decreased massively, which decreases the incentivization to take risk. And it also increases the incentivization to kind of sit on your chair and sit around and like take the money. So I won a card game. I won my job in a card game. I was a very good student. I did maths and economics. I got very good grades. But turns out, and I didn't know this beforehand, the way to get a job is you have to get an internship in your second year. So you have to apply with CVs, and people at LSE would be sending like 35 CVs to different banks. But obviously, like, because they're from rich families, they've kind of prepped for this, right? So everybody has like some really cool extracurriculars, like they founded the Junior United Nations or some or they're like concert pianist, you know. And I was like working in a sofa shop and like trying to become like a grime rapper when I was a kid. And so I was like with basically, because we can't get it. But I had quite a good rep as being like good grades, and he's a smart kid. A guy also in the math department from near above, I didn't know who he was, he walked up to me in the library one day and just said, Citibank hire one trader you through a card game. It's basically a maths game. You should enter that and you'll win. So I was like, yeah, let's just go for it. Let's throw ourselves into this card game, and that's how I got my job. That card game is called the trading game. It's a betting game, basically. So there's a special deck of cards, some low cards, some high cards. 5 players, we all get a card, and then essentially we're making bets on what the total number of the cards is. So if I've got a low card, I should think it's going to be low, and I'm betting it's going to be low. I'm making sell bets, essentially. And it's structured to be like financial markets, like a buy price and a sell price. I had the big advantage, which was this guy had explained me the rules of the game before the game itself. Other people were going into the event not knowing the rules of the game. If you are a maths or economics student, when you play a game like this, you are going to immediately do this thing which you're taught to do at university in mathematical subjects, calculate the expected probability, which is like, okay, these are the cards in the game, this is what we expect it to be. Oh, but I've got a really low card, so it's going to be lower like this. Everyone's going to do that. Like that is the instinctive thing that like a maths or an economics or a statistics student is going to do. So I've got a low card, I think the total is going to be 50. You've got a high card, you think the total is going to be 70. So I start saying 49, 51, you know, I'm going to trade. And you're going to start saying 69, 71. It makes sense, but it's actually quite a stupid thing to do because number one, you immediately give away your card, first thing. But number two, if I'm there and this guy's quoting around 50 and you're quoting around 70, I can buy at 50 and sell at 70 and make like 20 instant free profit. And I would just did that, bam, 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 bam. It was really, really stupidly easy in a way, but I mean, of course, I was only able to do that because I had the rules in advance. That's how I won the first round, just by kind of taking advantage of this kind of stupidity. Second round was the national finals. I developed a new strategy, which is kind of around sort of bullying the price around, manipulating the price around. It worked really well. Then there was a final of the final 5 guys. And this is like, if you win this, you're getting into the big thing. I came in with a really low card. So I know the total was going to be low. And my strategy was to bully the price up and to try and sell at a high price. So I just bullied it up. Game finishes, and I spent the whole game selling because at a high price. And like mathematically, it was almost impossible for me to lose because the price was really high and my card was really low. But then when everyone turned their cards over, the other cards in the game were the 7 highest possible cards, which the chances of it happening by chance are like 1 in, or maybe like 15 million or something, ridiculously impossible chance. So I knew that the game must have been rigged, but I don't think anyone else noticed. And I was just thinking like, what the f***? Like, these guys have like rigged the game against me. Like, I couldn't really. Then the guy goes to the front to announce the winner, and he announced that I was the winner, even though my actual score in the final was like negative. And he said, Gary's scores in the warm-ups were so good, we wanted to test him in the final to see what he did if everything was against him, to see if he would like really back himself. And he did back himself. That's what we like to see. So we decided he's the winner of the game, even though I actually lost. And tells you a little bit about the crazy people that work in this world, I think. The guys who did come into the card game tended to end up being really good traders at the bank. This CV cover letter, there's a massive amount of classism in that. It's because everyone has the top grade. Basically, it's based on extracurriculars. It's based on how good you are at like clarinet, basically. But then, you know, kids like me will poke holes in your objective methods. But they're probably going to be the best traders, really. So I was a trader, professional trader for Citibank 2008 until 2014. I was at LSE, the London School of Economics, before I went into banking. Everyone at LSE is obsessed with banking, obsessed with trading. So you get a good sense of what everybody wants. And back before 2008, everybody wanted to work in credit, which of course is the area that, you know, blew the global economy up. But the guys who were working in it before they blew the economy up were making a ton of money. So everybody wanted to go there. I went into this unfashionable area because they said you can start straight away and you can start trading straight away, which is really unusual, but they let me do that. Trading sort of changed in the sort of early 2000s, 2010s. It became a lot more mathematical. There's this cultural shift where it goes away from being these kind of guys, ex-rugby players, and of which there used to be a lot of that kind of thing in banking, towards, you know, LSE graduates, Harvard graduates, you know, maths graduates, physics graduates, who are very like honourable with maths. I think American Psych is very good, actually. It's, you know, it shows this guy who's in banking and he becomes a murderer and he's really clearly a dickhead. But I knew people at LSE that would memorise all of his lines by heart. And they loved him. And the reason is because he's really handsome, he's really rich, he's in great shape, he's got a really beautiful girlfriend, he's got a really expensive flat. And I think no matter how much you try to say, but he's a dickhead, if you put that in front of a 18, 19-year-old boy, you're going to a lot of 18, 19-year-old boys up. I'd wake up at, say, 5:30. I used to have, 7:30 was like, you have to be in by 7:30, or you're late. So I'd be up at 5:30, have my little BlackBerry, looking through the emails, digging through the prices, have a bit of breakfast, have a shower, cycle down through East London, get to work, try to get there roughly about 7. So trading floor in London is massive, massive, massive trading floor. It's in a big skyscraper in Canary Wharf, which is in the East End of London, not far from where I grew up, not far from where I live now. It's only on the 2nd floor, it's not on the top floor. The trading floors are all quite low down. These are the floors that are making the most money. Long, long rows of men with huge walls of screens, sort of 9 monitors, 12 monitors up in a big square rectangle around them. And most people will have that. And they'll be sitting back to back in these long rows. You know, it's classic skyscraper environments. My trading desk was in the foreign exchange department, which back then had the very sort of boisterous, laddish atmosphere. I came in first day in a suit and the guys were like, no suits, no ties. Whereas I think the European banks like Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank, they like you to wear suits. And then I'd be checking my positions. You know, really, there was a really big rush in the morning from sort of 8 a.m. to about 10:30 a.m. dealing with all the customers. So between 8 and sort of 10:30, 11 would just be a mad rush. By then I'd be knackered. I'd go and get massive Nando's, sit there, smash my Nando's down. Then in the afternoon, it's actually quite chill because Citibank offers a 24-hour pricing service, which means there's a period where if you call up, you get the London trader. There's a period where you get the New York trader, and there's a period where you get the Sydney trader. By our afternoon, we've handed over to New York. They're doing the business. So we're sitting around, reading the newspaper, sort of chatting. But in the evening, yeah, you chill out, read the paper, check you're making money. I was making a lot of money, so sort of celebrate. Then we'd finish at about 5. Earlier on in my career, I'd get dragged out a lot with like the senior traders drinking and going to fancy restaurants. And I kind of hated that, to be honest. But by the end of my career, I was about 24. I was, I'd cycle back home. I'd leave about 5, cycle home, go to the gym, cook dinner with my flatmate, watch the football if it's on. Obviously, I'm waking up at 5:30, so, I wasn't like big on the nightlife. A lot of people were waking up at 5:30 and also big on the nightlife. And I didn't understand how they did it, but I think I understand more now. The thing is, even when you're there, really, there's only sort of 3 or 4 hours of hard work. And that was because I was the Euro trader, which was like, that was definitely the most work of anyone. What you really were at the time, you were the risk holder. You were the risk holder. Your job was to be the person who made the decisions and took the risk, and who took the hit if you were wrong. First thing to say is there's lots of different kinds of traders trading lots of different kinds of things. I was an interest rates trader. It means I was borrowing and lending money. Interest rates traders borrow and lend money. And the idea is quite simple. You want to borrow at a low interest rate and you want to lend at a high interest rate. So a lot of what is done on that desk, the STIRT desk, the short-term interest rates trading desk, is one-day loans. Corporations, pension funds, hedge funds that have loans running out will come to people like me and say, we've got a loan in 6 months. What interest rate will you give us for a loan starting in 6 months' time? On a very, very basic level, when the economy is good, sometimes just because inflation is overheating, the central banks raise rates and they cut rates when the economy is weak. So in a very broad sense, although we are also looking at inflation, really we're trying to judge the strength of economies. In my desk, there were about 10 traders and each trader's job was to look at a different currency and you kind of get promoted through the ranks. It's split between what you'd call rich world currencies and what they call emerging market, poorer country currencies. So on my desk, the rich world desk, we're basically doing Europe, Japan, North America, Australia, New Zealand. First I was, desk junior, buying the coffees. Then I was New Zealand dollar trader. Then I was Swiss franc trader. Then eventually I was Euro trader. Then I moved to Japan and I was yen trader. As interest rates traders, we make loans. We borrow and lend money. We try to borrow cheaper and lend higher. A lot of people do that by a variety of dodgy ways. What I tried to do and what I think is most interesting is I did that by trying to predict the strength of economies. So in 2011, by the time I became a really profitable trader, Citibank, for some reason, had this big thing where they wanted to become the biggest bank in the world in terms of volumes traded. And because we're doing one-day loans, it's massive volume because if you borrow money for a day, you have to come back every day. It's stupid, but it looks like really big volume. And it meant that senior management had asked me to try to do as much trades as I could. So I was probably lending and borrowing between currencies, probably not far off $1 trillion a day of a variety of currencies, which was ridiculous, but it's what I'd been asked to do. I was in a situation towards the end of my career where I was trying to get fired. I was a very successful trader, but for a very short time, and I quit when I was like 27, I think. I was just so in the game, and I was quite dehumanized in a way. I'd done it to myself, but I mean, how do I balance this love for being the best with also like being a human and taking care of myself and also fulfilling my responsibility to a collapsing society? The traders don't think it's their job because they're trying to do trades to make money. The politicians are trying to win elections. The academics are trying to write fancy papers. The guys in media are trying to get clicks and get views, and, Actually, nobody's trying to fix it. My big success was in 2011, and that came from this realization that the economy was never going to get better. That we had a growing crisis of inequality that wouldn't be resolved, that the rich would get richer and the ordinary people would get poorer, living standards would collapse, things would collapse, and I put that bet on. And I never really stopped to think, what does that mean? Because my job was to bet on these things. If your job is to look at the economy, think, is it going to be strong and is it going to be weak? That's what you do, you know what I mean? And by the end of that year, 2011, I'd become Citibank's most profitable trader in the whole world by this bet that society would collapse. And everybody could see that I'd done that. Nobody turned around and said, should we do something? There's not like a bell you can go and ring. You know, I think it's worth realising, right? The best paid 10,000 economists in the world are all traders. Towards the end of my career, I decided I want to leave, and I tell my boss I want to leave. And my boss takes me out for this dinner, and he told me a story about a trader, a young trader at Deutsche Bank who, you know, nice guy, good trader, wanted to leave. The only problem is Deutsche didn't really want him to leave, you know, so they went through looked through some of his past trades and his emails, you know. There wasn't really anything in there, but there was enough, you know. There was, you know what I mean, enough to take him to court, and he rolled through court for years and years, and eventually the guy was bankrupted. And then he literally said to me, you know, I like you, I think you're a good person, but sometimes bad things happen to good people. We can make life very difficult for you. You're going to find out about that. It's so obviously similar to the way that like gangsters speak. That's exactly the same kind of person that goes into drug dealing. Exactly the same kind of person. And I can't help but think that a lot of the guys who become traders, if they grew up on the street I grew up on, would have been drug dealers. And a lot of the kids selling drugs in Ilford, if they went to the same boarding school as Rupert, and if they went to LSE, they would have become traders. Really, because it's the exact same personality type. I come from a very poor background, and the people who are being hurt by what has happened in the economy are people that were exactly like me when I was a kid, and people that are exactly like my mum and like my dad and like my sister and like my friends I grew up with. But it was really a long time before I ever started to explicitly think, should we do anything about this? And by then I've been kind of like kicked out to Tokyo. And my junior was this very, very, very posh, very rich, very wealthy, but very smart Australian kid. And I said to him, you know, do you think we should do something? And he was like, about what? And I was like, you know, about like collapsing global economy. And he was like, yeah, we put that trade on. We bought the green euro dollars. And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, yes. But, you know, do you think we should do something? And he was like, oh, no, I don't understand what you mean. You don't go into trading to save the world. But you kind of assume that there are people whose job it is to look after the world. You know, like politicians, most obviously, economists at universities, economists at central banks like the Fed, like the Bank of England, economists in the media. You kind of think these guys, their job is to look after it. But what was becoming increasingly clear to me was, well, our job is not to fix it. Those guys whose job is to fix it, they're definitely not going to fix it. Like, I want to leave and work for charity, and the banks are just, you know, the senior management is just very strongly implying, well, we're going to sue you. And at that point, they have no reason to sue you. They're just going to like, well, you do that, we're going to sue you. And I think, to be honest, that high levels of banking, and probably high levels of a lot of other industries, that's how it works. Like, the law is an arm of power. Like, they're like, okay, if you piss us off, we're gonna find a way to sue you. And I think that is kind of how it works. So I suspect that a lot of the people who get actually sued by banks are not the people who did bad. They're the people who pissed off the wrong people. So I get 18 months like wandering around Tokyo, like studying Japanese and like learning to draw. And they make me sit in the corner. So I'm just sitting in the corner of the office, like studying Japanese and drawing pictures of the Beatles and stuff. And in a way, it was nice. It was nice because it gave me a bit of time to sort of think about what I was doing. You know, I played that final game pretty well, despite the fact that I was in terrible mental health condition at the time. And I got them into a position where I think, first of all, I think they thought, because I was kind of a young kid from kind of a rough background making a lot of money, I think they thought that if they dug far enough, they'd find some dodgy in there. But really, I was just betting on like the world collapsing every single year. That's all I was doing. And in the end, two things happened simultaneously, which is I start sending these mad emails every day to like the CEO and the global head of HR. And one guy got fired, and then I get let out. So I don't really know whether it was because I started going mental and causing big problems, or if it was because this guy got fired. And I'll never know which one of those things, but eventually I got out, which is why I'm here and not stuck in a skyscraper. It's all a big game. It's all a big game. It's all a big power game, and like, you can kind of get away with whatever you want as long as it's not in the bank's interest to go for you. You know, and it's horrible, but, you know, this is the world that we've built, you know, where if you're very, very rich and very, very powerful, you can get away with a lot. I don't hate rich people. I am a rich people. I don't blame rich people. I'm an economist that makes millions of pounds by predicting the future, and I've got a good track record. These guys will get richer and richer, and they will eat the middle class alive. And it's not because they're bad, and it's not because they're evil. It's because that's what compound interest does. If you are a guy who's worth $100 million, you're going to make $5 million a year passive income, and you are going to use that money to buy the assets that ordinary families' kids need. That is the direction of travel. That is where we're heading up. We will lose the middle class. There's obviously that one scene in The Big Short. A couple of guys make a lot of money by betting on like the collapse of the American economy. And they're going to make a ton of money, and they're really happy, and they're dancing. And there's this Brad Pitt character that turns around, he's like, stop dancing. And they're like, why? We just made a load of money. He's like, you made money betting on the collapse of the economy. You know what that means? That means people losing their homes. That means people committing suicide. That means families breaking down. And obviously for me, as someone who's done the same thing, like, you feel that. My free market rate is $2 million a year. For 3 years, I was out here in the media, on YouTube for free, telling people exactly what was going to happen in COVID. You can go back and look at my early videos, my early articles from 2020, predicting COVID. Everything I said was going to happen exactly happened. Nobody's listening. It was hard. It was hard because you're used to getting up. You know, I was trading nearly $1 trillion a day, you know what I mean? And you're used to getting up and coming to the desk and bam, 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 smashing all that money through. And I would wake up in the morning and you just have this like energy, you know, this energy. And, you know, of course I made millions of dollars, but then once you quit, your income is zero, you know. I just had this really strong feeling like you're being unproductive, you're wasting your time. And I went to psychiatry on the NHS, and then she gave me like a little timetable to fill in, put in everything you're doing on here. And she looked at it and she was like, you're really, really busy. But I'd become so used to this hothouse environment where you just feel like you have to be 100% all of the time, that anything other than like working 120% felt like doing nothing to me. At the beginning of COVID, I picked up trading again because there was a lot of money on the table, so I still do a bit of trading. It just sits in investments, you know. Obviously, I quit my job, and the work I do now, it's educational work, trying to explain to people the importance of inequality. I don't get paid a lot of money for it. You know, in fact, very often I get paid no money for it. So it funds my work, it funds my life. You know, hopefully one day in the future it will pay for me to have a family with a bit of financial security. You know, who reads articles in The Guardian about economics? Like, rich people, basically. And I wanted to talk to ordinary people. So I moved to YouTube, started making a YouTube, made a load of videos, but of course nobody was watching them. And you know, I've got a degree from LSE, I've got a degree from Oxford. I'm a multi-millionaire, a very successful ex-trader. I put videos out about economics and people say, who the is this guy? He's not an economist. You know what I mean? And somebody called me up and I've read one of your articles, you've thought about writing a book. And I was like, no, not really. But then I thought, you know, if I could use this story, it's a good story, you know, expelled from school, wins a job in a card game, top trader in the world by betting on the collapse of society, you know, bank tries to stop him from leaving. It's a good story. I thought if I could tell that story well, then hopefully you will know with the confidence I have that this is going to go down the toilet. And if enough people know that, then we can stop it.
Did you have to sign any NDA or like keep any secrets?
I'm not allowed to answer that question, unfortunately. Legal reasons. I'd love to tell you, but I can't answer it. Yeah.
So if you
it's quite bizarre. You might think I'd be able to say I did sign an NDA, but I can't talk about these things. But unfortunately, I cannot discuss whether I signed an NDA or not.
My name's Shawn Ryan. I was a Navy SEAL for 5.5 years. This is everything I'm authorized to tell you. You know you're going to be cold, you know you're going to get hypothermia, but at the end of the day, going to buds is basically like getting kicked in the nuts. And so how do you get prepared for getting kicked in the nuts? You don't. You just take it. How do we keep each other in line? A lot of hazing. You have a tremendous responsibility. Being a member of a SEAL team, whether you're the communications guy or you're the lead sniper, you might be the guy planning the mission, you might be the point man. And so there is no room for jackassery, and if you're not doing your job to the best of your ability and you're clowning around, then you're going to get tuned up and maybe kicked off the team. And so it is a very It's very much a work hard, play hard environment, but if you can't play hard and work hard the next morning, you're not going to make it. When you're in the SEAL team, you are closer with your immediate teammates, your platoon mates, than you are with your own family. And so you eat with them, you sleep with them, you hang out with them, you party with them, you grieve with them. I mean, that is your family. And so you become inseparable. Home on my off time as a SEAL was a lot of happy hours and a lot of ladies' nights and chasing women and drinking booze and probably a bar fight or two. On deployment, an off day looks like a really good workout in the gym and a lot of Xbox. A lot of people pose as a SEAL. I've seen it happen a lot. This is 20 years ago. We would have the support guys going out in town and bragging to everybody that they are a SEAL, it's SEAL Team 8 or SEAL Team 2, and they would go to those specific bars where SEALs hang out. When those bars were empty, that way none of us were in there catching them doing it, but unfortunately we know the bar staff, we know people that work there, and so that word will get around, and a lot of times they would wind up taped to the flagpole naked when everybody shows up to work the next morning. The number one unspoken rule for the SEAL teams was work hard, play hard. As long as you could show up to work, ready to go, pristine condition, and be able to perform, they did not care how hard you played. Some of the jobs I had as a SEAL was, one, I was a point man. Basically, a point man is the point guy when you're doing an infill, entering into a target. You're the navigator, navigating your route in, how you're going to get in, how you're going to get out, how you're going to lead your entire team in. My first mission as a SEAL was to go to Haiti in 2004. There was a lot of civil unrest going on all over Haiti. We staged out of Guantanamo Bay, and basically what we would do is we would fly over on a helicopter every morning and do reconnaissance in all these different towns and villages to report back about the civil unrest. We had prisoners breaking out of prison. It was just complete chaos all over Haiti, bodies all over where on the beach, but it was just a reconnaissance mission. I felt good. It wasn't enough action for me. It made me really hungry for more. I wanted to go to the Middle East. The hairiest mission I've been on was when we went to Baghdad, and this was at SEAL Team 2. There was an election going on, and we had a badass lieutenant who started farming us out to conventional units who were having problems. We would find units that were getting blown up by IEDs or being ambushed on roads. Terrorists would set up roadside bombs, set up ambushes, and they would just blow these vehicles, kill our guys, time and time again. We would go with these conventional units for a couple of weeks, training them up, and then we would actually take them on a real world mission with us. And every time we went out, we would kill the guys that were killing them within a 24-hour time frame. I wasn't actually a schoolhouse trained sniper. I was just really good at it. And so when we did all these sniper missions, I was basically aiding the lead sniper and teaching the conventional guys how we do business. It was one of the biggest responsibilities I've held. There was a very small village outside of Taji that was considered black. And so what black means is no U.S. troops or personnel are allowed to drive through, walk through, fly over. You basically just stay completely out of the town because it's so dangerous. This one was out in basically farm fields. And so we took 4 teams and 4 teams of 2 to 3 guys each, and we'd set them up along this road. So towns here, black town. My OP was the first one right outside of the black town, so it was the most dangerous spot to be in. And then we had our command and control type observation point kind of hidden back in the rear where they could do comms. And about halfway through the day, we got compromised. We were in weeds that were probably about chest high, and so I'd padded down this little hallway, and I was laying in the grass looking at the town like I should have been, probably about 30 meters off the road, and I saw a man walk right by me out of my peripheral, and I noticed when he walked by me, he noticed me. I could see him looking off the side of his eyes through his peripheral. I thought, maybe I'm supposed to kill this individual. He's going into a black town. I wanted to pull us out. I wanted to do an emergency extract because I had compromised the team. Rest of the sniper OPs decided they wanted to stay. They wanted to see how things went. 10 minutes later, we got mortared, probably 4 to 5 different impacts right on top of us. I wanted to emergency extract again because I knew the next thing that was probably going to come was the fighting age males in the village would have walked online through the field and just killed all of us. The next thing that search party did come, but it came with vehicles. We were so well hidden that goats were actually eating vegetation out of our ghillie suits with goat herders seeing this. And so everybody was scared to move when that was happening because you didn't want to alarm one of the goats, and the one goat goes crazy, then the whole herd goes crazy, then the goat herder knows something's going on. So we didn't move. A couple of goat herders had passed. What we noticed was 5 guys coming out of the village, the black village, carrying AK-47s, carrying 105 rounds, carrying wire, shovels, everything you need to basically make an IED explosive. So they walked right past me, and we radioed to the rest of the team that these guys were coming their way, but nobody answered our radio. They started digging. They planted the bomb. All I heard was just shots over and over and over and over. It sounded like a gunfight. It sounded like the bad guys the terrorists were killing my guys because all of us were suppressed, meaning quieter shots, no muzzle flash. It seemed like forever, but it was probably less than a minute. And we kept calling our guys. Hey, what's going on? Hey, what happened? What happened out there? Is anybody out? Are you guys alive? Give me a head count. Nothing. In my head, I knew everybody was dead. And so it was me and 2 other guys, and we just got back to back. And we said, all right, this is it. We're just going to take as many of these people out as we can before they get us. First thing we hear come over the radio, maybe 5-10 minutes later, is, holy shit, we just killed the out of those guys. They let the Army guys take the shots. They were not suppressed. So I thought their gunshots were the enemy's gunshots, but it was the Army guys, unsuppressed, shooting alongside with our snipers who were suppressed. You know, hearing my guy come out saying that they had just killed those guys was one of the best sounding voices I've ever heard in my life, knowing that my guys were still alive and that we had defeated the enemy. SEALs use a lot of weapons. We use 300 Win Mag sniper rifle. We use a 50 caliber sniper rifle. We use a 7.62 sniper rifle. We use a 5.56 sniper rifle. We have M60 machine guns. We have Mark 48 machine guns. We have Mark 46 machine guns. We have Mark 19 grenade launchers. We have M203 grenade launchers. We have 50 cal machine guns. We have mini guns. We have pretty much anything you can think of that fires a bullet. Main weapon I used was a M4 10-inch barrel with a Night Force suppressor, and secondary was a P226. A suppressor is not a silencer. A lot of people think it's a silencer. It does dub the noise down a lot. You don't need to wear ear protection when you're shooting with a suppressor, but it's not like what you see on the movies where it's where it sounds like a sewing machine. The main point of a suppressor is to suppress the flash that comes out of the end of the muzzle, whether it be pistol or rifle, because if you're shooting at night and you're in a combat scenario, every time you fire that weapon unsuppressed, it's going to leave a signature. The enemy combatants will wait for that flash, and then they'll aim at where the flash came from. So if you have a suppressor and you're on night vision, then they can't tell where the shots came from, so they don't have anything to actually shoot at. Most fun to fire was definitely the Carl Gustav rocket launcher. I can't remember the exact millimeter of the rocket, but it is about this long, packed full of high explosives, and they will take just about anything out that you point it at. So one thing that we would use them a lot for are terrorists hiding in caves. It's good to be familiar with as many weapon systems as you possibly can be. Two, we were in the Middle East, and that's the type of weapons that the terrorists were using, and so we train on all the Soviet-style weapons as well, which are what the enemy combatant, the terrorists, were using at the time. You might be dressed up like a local or somebody from Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Pakistan, wherever you're operating, Syria. You might be dressed up in the local garments. And what does everybody have there? An AK-47. So you could be undercover, and that's the reason you need to be familiar with it. You might run out of ammo on a direct action or some type of a raid where you have to pick up an enemy combatant's weapon and be very familiar with that to continue on with the mission. When you see seals in the back of a old Toyota Hilux truck, a lot of times what that is those are many times up armored, but they blend in with the local vehicles as well. So can't get Hiluxes here in the United States, but everywhere else in the world is running around with diesel Toyota Hiluxes, especially in the Middle East. A lot of times we're attached to some type of a partner force. Whether that be a force of Afghan commandos or Iraqi commandos or wherever you're at, a lot of times in special operations you're going to be attached to a partner force. And those partner forces use Toyota Hiluxes. If you're in a 100 vehicle convoy with a partner force and there's only 4 vehicles that actually have SEALs in them and the rest of them is a partner force, you don't want to be the guys that are standing out, because if you do get ambushed, it's going to be a dead giveaway. You don't want to make yourself a higher profile target than anybody else on the battlefield. We did a course that was actually put on by the British MI6. We were actually going to go into Eastern Europe, Eastern Bloc countries in Europe and hunt down warlords and people that have committed war crimes. They put us through a course that taught us how to break into cars, how to hotwire cars, how to blend in, how to surveil somebody on foot, how to surveil somebody in a vehicle, how to surveil somebody in a boat, how to follow them into 50-story buildings, and blend in every type of environment that you can think of and be actually comfortable doing it. I would say the most important piece of equipment that you need in combat is a radio, because radio gets you out of there, it gets you in there, it's your communications, and it is actually the biggest gun on the team because you're calling in the biggest guns. You're calling in A-10s, you're calling in fast movers, you're calling in Apaches, you're calling in Spectre gunship. So I would say that the radio is by far the most critical piece of equipment for a mission. I grew up in a small town in Missouri, about 6,000 people. I was a disturber, troublemaker. I liked to party, I liked to raise hell, but it was a good childhood. I had a really good childhood, very close with my family, my brother and sister. I tried to go into the Marine Corps first, but they wouldn't let me in to go force reconnaissance at the time. They told me I had to go infantry. Then I went to the Army, told them I wanted to be a Green Beret. They kind of laughed me out of the office. I didn't even know what a Navy SEAL was at the time, and the Navy recruiter stuck his head out and was basically said, "Hey, have you ever thought about the SEAL teams?" And gave me a pamphlet. So I went home and went to the library, checked out every book I could possibly find on special operations and Navy SEALs, watched all the documentaries on National Geographic and Discovery, and decided that that's what I was going to do. I wrestled in high school. I wanted to do the most grueling thing I could possibly do in the small town that I grew up in, which was wrestling. So I cut a lot of weight, did a lot of running, really had to work on my swimming. That was the biggest challenge for me, was the swimming. And so I did a lot of laps in the pool. You can't prepare for it mentally. A lot of people never believed that I could make it. I wasn't a superstar athlete. I really wasn't much of an athlete at all. I didn't make good grades. I wasn't the most popular kid in school by any means. And so I think a lot of people thought that I would just go and fail. The only reason I didn't quit is because I didn't want to disappoint my old man, and that's because I felt like I disappointed him a lot as a child. And I wanted to prove to him that, that there was more than what he saw for the previous 18 years. BUDS is the very, very beginning of the pipeline to becoming a Navy SEAL. BUDS stands for Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training. They want to know how tough you are. They want to know what you can take. They want to know that you are a team player. They want to know what your physical endurance is like, what your mental toughness is like. And I knew it was going to be tough. I didn't know it was going to be that tough. First phase is very structured. Usually you'll wake up, you will have some sort of a PT event, meaning you're either going to do a 4-mile timed run or a 2 nautical mile swim, or you're going to do an O course, or you may go to the pool and do a pool workout. But you always start off with some type of a physical exercise. Then you'll be getting your ass kicked on the grinder by the instructors with calisthenics, push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, flutter kicks, getting sprayed with the hose, getting sand kicked on you. Nice little wake up in the morning, and then that will filter into more beatings until lunch. At lunch, you probably get about 30 minutes. You run back from lunch. It's about 1.5 miles to and from lunch. You run everywhere. And then beatings commence after lunch, well into the evening. Usually you're done by about 9 o'clock at night. You'll probably do some type of rock portage. Those are the little boats that you see out there, those rubber boats with the guys with the paddles and the life jackets, and they have to land those boats on the rocks with the surf. Sometimes the surf can get up to 12, 15-foot swells, and so it makes for a very challenging experience. Hell Week is famously known as the most grueling week of SEAL training. It's 5 days, 5 nights, no sleep. Maybe you might get a little nap here and there, but you are constantly moving. You are constantly in the water. You're freezing your ass off, fighting hypothermia. I believe the water there is a brisk 58 degrees. I was so miserable when I was in Hell Week that I almost quit. My buddy slapped me in the face and told me, "There's no way you're leaving us here." What you don't see on TV and in the documentaries and everything is, like I said, you're constantly wet, you're constantly sandy because 90% of the course takes place on the beach. And so the instructor staff, they know that sand gets into every crevice of your body. And they take advantage of that. So they might have you do a 5-mile run after you go get wet and sandy, and that rubs all the skin off your crotch, off your armpits. Any skin that's rubbing together, it's going to be raw. Then when that dries, they have you hit the surf, meaning get back in the salt water, which is like dumping hydrochloric acid on your skin, and it's just a constant vicious cycle of doing that over and over and over and over. Everybody that quits has to ring the bell. It's a very humiliating experience. You have to ring the bell in front of your entire class. Most classes, at least when I went through, were right around 200 to 250 people, and then place your helmet in a line right under the bell. So after Hell Week, you will just see a line of 100+ helmets all under that bell. The first time I heard that bell, I was thinking, I hope to God that's not me one day. I did not want to disappoint my father and call him, letting him know that I had quit and didn't have what it took. And once I got that in my head, it never crossed my mind again. They just want to see that you can overcome just about anything, but it's not near as grueling as getting shot in combat or having a limb blown off or something like that, and they want to know that you're going to fight through and still be with the team and not give up. When Hell Week's finished, it's one of the best feelings in the world. They bring the American flag out. It's a big ceremony. You haven't slept in 5 days, and they basically just give you a big congratulations for completing the toughest military training in the world, and then they offer you a pizza. Then there's phase 2, which is dive phase, and that is learning how to do scuba. That's learning closed circuit breathing apparatuses known as a Drager. The first thing you do is you go through dive physics and dive medical so that you actually understand dive medicine and how deep you can go for how long, things like that. Then once you pass that, then you move into open circuit, which would be what most people consider or call scuba diving. It's called pool comp. It's the last big obstacle that gets people kicked out, that they can't pass. It starts with very minimal tasks. It might be just, hey, put your tanks on underwater. And then it's, all right, your tanks are malfunctioning, you need to take them off, figure out what's going on. All the way up to, you'll be fully jocked up with all your dive equipment, minus fins, and you'll just be crawling on the bottom of the pool. And then a group of instructors will come down. They'll give you what they call a surf hit, which is basically beating the shit out of you underwater. They'll punch your gut, make sure your air is gone, tie your hoses up so you can't breathe out of your breathing apparatus. They'll tie that in knots. They will make your tanks malfunction, turn your air off. Basically what they do is create mass confusion and take all of your air away. And what they want to see is that you can remain calm. You're not going to jet to the surface for air. Get your dive rig back to a functioning way and continue on that track. There's no secret to staying calm down there. You have no air. You just got the shit knocked out of you. You can't figure out what's wrong. You have water in your eyes. I mean, you can't really see. And but you know, it's not supposed to be easy. Open water is a whole new ball game. 9 times out of 10, if we're diving under a ship to plant a bomb, and then we're kicking back out. Sometimes these can be 8-hour excursions, you know, and so they want to see that you're comfortable underwater and that you can handle yourself, and not only yourself, your buddy. You're not diving the coral reef down in Key West. You are diving San Diego Bay, ships, sharks, seals, dolphins that are trained to kill you. So in the early 2000s, the Navy developed the mammal program. And what they were doing were they were training dolphins and seals, the animal, not the special ops. They were training seals and dolphins on anti-swimmers, and I believe it was explosive detection. And so they would train these animals, and then they would send them out, and the dolphins would obviously use their sonar to find enemy combatants that were trying to plant bombs on ships. So, as a Bud student, guess who the test dummies are? Fortunately, I did not have that experience, but I did wind up in the mammal cages by accident. The only way you know where you're going is you memorize your bearing, you look at your compass, you hit your bearing, and you count your kicks. So my kick count was 66 kicks, was 100 yards. It was about a 6-hour dive, I believe, and my kick count was a little off because of the current. I had the wrong bearing next to the pier that you're diving off of for buds, just so happens to be the mammal program. And so if you look at the top of the water, it is chain link fence, so you'd think that goes all the way down to the bottom. Well, it doesn't. It's more like a cargo net under the water, and they kept saying, Dive Bear 23, you are entering the mammal cages. And I remember looking at my buddy like, "F***ing idiots, they're going to go in the mammal cages." And they kept saying it. I was the lead navigator, and we were completely what appeared to be inside the mammal cages. I looked up, I saw the cargo net. It was going over my wetsuit hood. That's why I didn't feel it, all the way behind us. So when we looked up, we thought we were inside the mammal cages, and kicked like hell to get the hell out of there. Turned out that the net was just draped over top of us, and we were dive bear 23. So everybody hits a low point, and so when you have a good guy, a good teammate that puts out, that cares about the rest of the team, when he hits that low point, the rest of the team will help encourage him to get his spirits back up, not to quit, and let him know that, you know, the rest of the team's depending on him. My favorite part was the land warfare phase, which is demolition, firearms, land navigation, basically your land warfare phase. They start to treat you like an actual human being again. And the beatings become less and less. You're learning land navigation, you're learning pistols, you're learning how to shoot rifles, you're learning how to shoot submachine guns, and the best part of all is learning demolition. You're learning how to use C4, TNT, Bangalore torpedoes, data sheet, you name the explosive, we use it. You're blowing up cars, you're blowing up buildings, learning precision demolition, you're blowing things up in the water, like obstacles that they'll put out into the ocean. You'll dive down, plant a haversack on them, and blow it right there in place. I love to blow shit up. The first weapon I trained on was a Sig Sauer P226 9mm handgun. I think they start with the handgun because the handgun is the most challenging weapon to master in firearms. And once you have the fundamentals of handgun shooting down, then all the other kind of shooting, just with all the other platforms, just kind of falls into place. SEALs are such good shots because we train. It gets ingrained in you. And so even in buds, you're going to spend a week to 2 weeks of dry firing. And what I mean by dry firing is no bullets, no nothing, you just your weapon. And so you come out just like you're shooting just like you're shooting for real with real bullets, but you get your form down. It just want all the motions, all the grips, everything, sight alignment, grip, the way you hold it, the way you present your pistol, everything has to be perfect. And then by the time that you put a real bullet in that weapon, it goes right where it needs to go. And then you'll do the same thing with rifle. You'll take your M4, you'll start shooting, dry firing for a week, maybe 2 weeks, before a live round ever leaves that barrel. You'll know exactly what you're doing. I left the SEALs for a multitude of reasons. I didn't get enough action. I was very, very gung-ho about going to war. We did the Haiti thing, then we went to Germany, then we went to Afghanistan, did a little bit in Afghanistan, did a lot in Iraq, but I didn't want to do another 6 years for a very small portion of it to be in combat. I saw what 20 plus years will do to somebody, to their body, to their home life. Pretty much everybody I know was divorced or has been divorced or was getting a divorce. A lot of them didn't know their kids very good. Your platoon, your teammates, are your primary family, and the families are the secondary. And I knew that if I stayed in at the rate I was going, that I was going to be a very lonely person come retirement. I wanted to try business. I became a real estate agent, and I failed miserably at it and got into a fire academy. I found out that I wasn't going to have a guaranteed job and that it would likely take about 2.5 years before I did get a full-time job as a firefighter. I didn't have time. I don't have 2.5 years to wait around. A friend of mine gave me a call and told me that he wanted me to try out for this contracting program. He said, this is a black program. I can't tell you who we're actually working for, but I can assure you that everybody who's in this program or even gets a chance to try out for this program has to have had a special ops background. And about 6 months later, I got a call to show up at a specific location, what kind of gear I needed, and that I was going to be a tryout. And so I went, I did the tryout. It took about a month. When we finished the tryout, they had told us that the client that we were going to be working for was Central Intelligence Agency. Pay was astronomically higher. It was probably 4 to 5 times higher than I was making as a SEAL. The deployment cycle as a contractor is kind of on you. I liked to do 60 days on, 60 days off. At the end, I was doing 45 days on, 45 days off. Some guys like to do 90, 120 days out, 1 week back. It's kind of all up to you and how much you want to give them and how much you want to give your family. When I left the agency, I started a tactical training company. It grew very fast. Got to train Keanu Reeves for John Wick 3. That was pretty much the height of it. Then I got really tired of it after doing the job for real for 14 years, give or take a little bit. I had grown a pretty successful YouTube channel from the tactics training videos that I would put out. And so I decided that I wanted to document history from the people who were there, the way it actually happened. So I started the Shawn Ryan Show for a couple of reasons. I really got tired of watching the mainstream media talk about all the events that I was a part of or that my colleagues were a part of. It was always somebody that had never been there. And veterans didn't have a voice. And I wanted to bring that out and talk to guys like myself who had been through that and how they got out of it. So everybody that I brought on at the beginning had found some type of success through entrepreneurship and had been through the low points, the addictions, to adrenaline, to substance abuse, to broken families, to suicide attempts. You have been in a fight or flight state for as long as your career was, basically. More adrenaline dumps than anybody else you could possibly imagine. Multiple adrenaline dumps a day. That's a lot of chemicals, being released into your brain. It becomes an addiction for adrenaline. My coping mechanisms were finding new ways to get an adrenaline release. Lots and lots of sleep meds, everything from Ambien, Valium, Xanax, lorazepam, anything I could get my hands on, opiates, hydrocodone, tramadol, you name it, I'll take it. I moved out of the country to Colombia, South America. I lived in Medellin for quite a while, and I got really into cocaine and started going into the worst neighborhoods I could find in Colombia to find where to buy cocaine from. And when that got boring, then I would go to another country and I would start doing it there. At the worst point in my life, I was drinking 2/5 of vodka a day. I would wake up and have about 1/5 of vodka in mini bottles that would be everywhere, all over my house, in my car, in my bedroom, everywhere. And then at night after dinner, I would just crack open 1/5 out of the freezer and start going to town on that, wash down my pills to go to sleep, which by the end of it, they didn't even really put me to sleep. And then I would wake up with a nice pick-me-up of Adderall or some other type of stimulant to keep me going, and it just became this vicious cycle for years and years and years. When you are a SEAL, there's not much support. It's not something that they like to address. They don't want to bring any light to that. It makes the units look bad, and so a A lot of them pretend like it's never happening. Nobody wanted to go to medical because everybody wanted to go on the mission. And so if you went to medical, everybody was scared that it might be some type of chronic illness or injury that would take them off the mission, so a lot of guys would hide it. I had a hernia that I got in basic training, and I refused to tell them all the way through because I was scared that they were going to pull my SEAL contract out from under me. So I went all the way through basic training with a bulging hernia in my groin, and finally told them when I was done. I've had multiple concussions from explosions, from being blown up, blowing cars up, shooting huge rocket launchers like Carl Gustav's, falling out of helicopters. I don't even know how high we were because it was dark, and I missed the rope and fell out of the helo. But it was 50 feet or less. A lot of wear and tear from Hump of the Mountains of Afghanistan, a lot of wear and tear from buds, major back issues, those kind of things. I've never been shot. A lot of us have the same injuries and the same symptoms, and deal with PTSD and deal with traumatic brain injury and stuff like that. And when you get out, though, there are a lot of resources. Not very many government resources. The government doesn't do a very good job at treating these things. It's a dark time for a lot of guys, especially when they get out. We're not used to slow-paced environments. We're not used to not having adrenaline dumps. We're not used to integrating into a civilian environment, and we're not used to having to deal with feelings. You have a mission to do. That's the only reason you're there. And so when you get out, and you have to learn patience. I guess I'll say that. And a lot of guys don't have very good patience when they get out. But what there are is a lot of veterans out there who have started nonprofits, and the focus of the nonprofit is what worked for them, whether that's group therapy or psychedelic therapy or going to hyperbaric chambers to try to repair your brain health. I did 2 different psychedelics. The first one was Ibogaine, which is about a 12-hour experience. It's like watching your entire life through a different perspective. And then you do what they call 5-MeO-DMT. It's basically an ego death, and it is a death experience. That was the most intuitive experience that I've ever had. And when I came out of the death experience and experienced the bliss, I could feel and see a flow of energy coming from the ocean onto the shore, into the grass, up the trees. And for the first time in my life, I've realized that everything is connected and everything is one. It was really intense. I came back. I didn't need any of my meds anymore. I quit drinking. I'm sober for 2.5 years. I quit smoking cannabis. I quit a lot of things. And I was present with my family. It brings hope to all the guys that are getting out that hear this. They hear the low points that these guys, including myself, went through, and they realize it's not impossible. It gives them hope.
My name is Andrew Bustamante, and I'm a former CIA intelligence officer. I spent 7 years living and working for CIA, and this is everything I am authorized to tell you. CIA is always asking itself the question, is it worth killing foreign lives to protect American lives? And the answer is always yes. There's 2 types of killings that we really have to talk about here. There's intimate killing, and then there's non-intimate killing. And when I say intimate killing, I mean you look in the eyes of the person whose life you're taking. Most of CIA is equipped to enable not intimate killing, which is when you have a drone or you have a missile or you have a rocket of some sort, or you set some sort of sabotage that's designed to kill people. My operational history does include enabling non-intimate kinetic strikes against terrorist targets specifically. And many of us participated in the global war on terror from 2000 to 2022. There were kinetic strikes against terrorist targets all over the world, sometimes many times a week. While Obama was one of the best presidential diplomats that the United States has ever seen, he was also very heavy-handed in terms of covert action. And he was very decisive in his choices to use non-intimate killing as a way of going after high-priority targets in the terrorist world. I have become almost harshly, ruthlessly pragmatic about the fact that I want America to remain the only superpower in the world, because as soon as our superpower status slips and someone else rises to meet our challenge, we all become that much less safe and secure. The CIA, as a bureaucracy, evolves very slowly, but its mission stays crystal clear. It is there to ensure American primacy through national security and the stealing of foreign secrets. When you consider the intelligence community as a whole, there are many pieces, many players, many different agencies that are included. I think it's currently at 36 or 37 different members of the intelligence community, of which CIA is only one member, along with DIA and NSA and NRO, DOD, the Army, the Air Force, the Navy. What CIA is charged with, however, is being the hub, the central intelligence agency, meaning all the other intelligence collection activities must funnel through CIA to be created, to be transformed into what we call a final product, a final analytical or final intelligence product that is then sent to the executive in the president's daily brief. In order to understand what CIA is today, you have to recognize that 9/11 was a massive turning point in how CIA operates. The pre-9/11 CIA is very different than the CIA post-9/11. 9/11 was a massive intelligence failure, the largest in American history. But following the 9/11 Commission, findings about CIA and the requirement for CIA to have heavy oversight completely transformed the nature of the spy business for not just Central Intelligence, but for all of the intelligence partners in the IC. What I understand of the pre-9/11 CIA, it was the Wild West. CIA was a giant experimental laboratory first, and an organization of accountability second. Since 2001, they have become an organization of accountability first, and they are much, much less experimental. Anything that your adversary was doing was fair game for you to experiment with. And it's not hard to understand why, because if your adversary finds an unfair advantage using human trafficking or drug smuggling, and that puts your national security at risk, then you have lost that game. You have lost that chess match. So if you want to keep up with your adversary, if you want to keep pace with your opponent, you have to be willing to work outside of the bounds of moral and ethics that your citizenship, that your citizenry actually has to fall within, because you're charged with protecting them from the outside threats. You're not charged with enforcing the ethics and the morality within the country's boundaries. Espionage is illegal everywhere. However, when you swear an oath as a covert intelligence officer in support of an intelligence agency, you actually fall under a very strict carve-out in American law that makes it so that you can commit espionage against foreign targets in support of national security when it is ordered by an authorized person. It is illegal for a CIA officer to pursue an American citizen without disclosing their affiliation to CIA. But FBI, Homeland Security, border security, they are actually able to pursue operations against American citizens under their authorities, which are different than CIA's. The way that the government spies on the American people isn't the way that you think it is from TV and media. The government doesn't have to dedicate really almost any resources to spying on American citizens, because American citizens basically give up all of their raw data to corporations. So all CIA or FBI or DOD really has to do is become a commercial client of a big data company. and they can get any information they need. So why would you try to break the law and listen in on an American's phone call when you could just buy their phone records from Verizon or from Sprint or from T-Mobile? We are not a police state. We are a commercial state, which means that the federal government, as long as it has a national security requirement, there will be a commercial company who rises to the occasion to meet that requirement and do it all legally. Edward Snowden's whistleblowing about the operation that NSA was running, in many ways, what he was blowing the whistle on was the illegal use of legally collected data. So you have this very small, very narrow cutout that lets you commit crimes all over the world and be protected by the status that you're in as a sworn officer in an intelligence agency. My path to CIA was not traditional, but it was fairly common still. I was actually trying to get into the Peace Corps, believe it or not. I was leaving the military. I was a nuclear missile officer, wore a key around my neck that would destroy the world. And after doing that for 2 years, living underground, I wanted to do the exact opposite. Imagine the last time you had a bad breakup with a girlfriend or a boyfriend. You leave the one relationship, and what do you look for? Something that is the complete and polar opposite. But in the process of that online application, a red screen popped up that said you may be qualified for other opportunities in the federal government. Will you put your application on hold for 72 hours while a recruiter reaches out to you? Because of what the Peace Corps is looking for. It's looking for people with a high risk tolerance. It's looking for people that are embracing discomfort. It's looking for people who are essentially open to the idea of trying to do the impossible, trying to make some broken part of the world whole again. And that type of person is also well suited for undercover intelligence work because all the odds are against you, you have to embrace discomfort, and the risks are massive. So it's, when you look at the two side by side, you can really see that the people who give up their lives in pursuit of an ideology are really quite the same, even though their ideology might be different. Once you work for the Peace Corps, you are forever banned from working in intelligence. And once you've worked in intelligence, you are forever banned from working in Peace Corps. It's something that the federal government does to make sure that our Peace Corps representatives, our true Peace Corps reps, are never accused of espionage overseas. So like any 27-year-old male who's single, I was always looking for the next best things. 24 hours later, I got a phone call from a 703 unlisted number, and that started my whole application process for CIA. Training at CIA is better than it is in the movies. In the movies, it makes it look like everything's, fancy and high tech and cutting edge, and it's not quite like that. It's much more austere. It's much more challenging and old school than that. But it really is a ton of fun, and you go through all that training with other people. The specific lengths of training at CIA are also one of those topics that's still classified. The details of the farm are still classified, and the full length of the farm is also still classified. But I will tell you, it's many months, and it is not many years in order to get up to speed as a field officer. What CIA wants is people who can handle a great deal of outside stimuli with very little emotive response, which makes people who are anxiety prone, autism prone, or pathological liars, sociopaths, it makes them very attractive because when you have an antisocial personality disorder or when you have a diagnosable form of autism, you are already insulated against massive changes in your emotional state, which makes you more effective in training, but it also makes you more effective in the operational field. There are different ways that CIA pressure tests its trainees to measure an emotional response. One of the core things they do is they oversaturate you, what's called task saturation. They give you more tasks than you could ever possibly complete, whether that's in an hour or in a day or in a mission or in a simulation or even in a classroom. That's a very basic example, a very simple example of one of the things that can happen in the first few days of training. As training goes on, they put you through other types of more intense efforts to see what your emotional response might be. Whether that's exposing you physically to very cold temperatures, whether that's sleep deprivation, whether that's simulated capture, simulated interrogation. When you sign up for CIA, many people are surprised when they find out that they have to go through some very intensive training to be able to understand how to resist torture, how to survive or sustain through torture, and how to manage captivity. Torture is a sensitive topic at CIA and in many parts of the world, and it's not a surprise that it is such, right? Because the reality is that torture is inhumane. But the other reality is that torture is very much used by enemies of the United States. We prioritize the need to escape above all other priorities, even above the priority of protecting cover, protecting secrets, and anything else. When you watch a TV show or a movie and you see somebody resisting torture by just stating their social security number and saying that they're a soldier, that's not really how it works when you're an intelligence operative. Instead, it's a continuation of the cat and mouse game. You're always trying to compete with the person who has you in captivity because you need to retain enough resources to effectively escape so that you can get back with the intelligence that you've collected as a captive. And if you think about it, a captive has a great deal of information. You understand how you got captured, you understand how you're being held, you understand the rotation of guards, you understand the questioning, interrogation. So to be able to regain someone who's been captured is an incredibly valuable thing from an intelligence point of view for CIA, which is why they are more focused on that than they are on whether or not you disclose parts of your secret identity or parts of your operation along the way in order to resource yourself for a proper escape. Lying is a fundamental skill when you are a field officer, but it is very much a learned skill. In the process of being recruited to CIA, you go through many different psychological batteries, personal interviews, actual tests, interviews where you talk to psychologists, you talk to seasoned officers, and throughout that time, what they're really doing is assessing your natural ability to lie and your natural ability to fabricate according to a specific storyline that they give you, which is a whole different level of lying. They're just going to sharpen that sword, refine that ability further. I always wondered if there was something wrong with how much I enjoyed lying until I met some of my peers at CIA. There's one person who became a close friend of mine at CIA. He's still undercover. He's in a very deep cover capacity. Fantastic guy, fantastic friend. He was such an effective liar, he could have been fabricating the entire thing. He could have convinced me that he was a good friend, when in fact he wasn't, because he was, by all accounts, a pathological liar. He was somebody who lied simply because he got a dopamine rush, a personal satisfaction from lying to anyone and everyone around him. This individual who became someone I really do count on as a friend, it's unsettling even now to think that it could have all been fabricated. I could have been just one of his exercises in his pathology for lying. When you've spent enough time inside CIA, you start to see how everybody is using you. It's there to manipulate people. Somehow when you're coming on board, when you're going through the recruitment process and the training process and you're a young officer, you believe that they're there to support you. You believe that you are outside of the manipulation. But then as you get more seasoned, as you continue on in the years, you start to see that the promotion process inside, the personal development and professional development process inside, the way that some missions are given to some people and other missions are not, it's all just an example, a microcosm of the larger organization's way of executing operations. And you start to see that the senior levels of CIA are manipulating the lower levels of CIA because that is the school of thought that we were all trained in. We weren't trained in leadership development and motivation and encouragement. We were trained in manipulation and deception and fabrication. So is it a surprise that the culture within the building is just a representation of exactly the same skills that we teach every junior officer? CIA has a concept called the 3 lives, and it talks about the 3 different types of lives that all people live. There's our public life, our private life, and our secret life. The public life is the public persona that you put on every morning, every day that you step out of your house, your apartment, or your office. It's when you act like you're paying attention when you're not. It's when you laugh at your boss's jokes even though they're a jerk. It's not who you really are. It's just who you have to be in order to forge the life that you're trying to build. Behind that public life is a private life. That private life is a life that's only known to you and your closest associates, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your wife, your mom, your dad, right? In this private life, they know that you're really very kind, even though you are rude in public. They know that you are sensitive and creative, even though you seem aloof in public. What most people think is that a relationship, a true meaningful relationship, happens in your private life. What CIA knows is that there's a third life altogether. That third life is your secret life. In your secret life, that's the place where you keep your deepest, darkest secrets. And in order for it to be a dark secret, it usually has a very dark element to it. It's where you put your shame. It's where you put your guilt. It's where you put the questions that you can't stop asking before you fall asleep at night, but you don't want to burden anyone else with. All of that is what happens in your secret life. And the cognitive reality is that everybody has a secret life. Think about that. When you let someone into that life, that is when you build a true forged relationship. Lifetime trust, lifetime equality. Because in your entire life, you're only going to let maybe a half dozen people into your secret life. And once someone is in your secret life, they never leave. That's the power of the secret life. CIA teaches a system for how you break through a target's public life into their private life, and from their private life into their secret life. They teach us that system because in order to make a true reporting asset, someone who was a patriot for their country, who is now a traitor against their country, the only way to win a person's loyalty to that extreme is to get into their secret life and convert them from being loyal to their country to being loyal to you. The Human Intelligence Asset Recruitment Process. It's a process that's acronymed SADRAT, S-A-D-R-A-T. And that process is a very well-documented process cognitively, clinically, and then also in the intelligence sector, military intelligence, FBI, CIA. SADRAT stands for Spot, Assess, Develop, Recruit, Handle, and Terminate. Yes, handle starts with an H, but the acronym uses the letter A. That is because it is still a federal government acronym. So that's just how the federal government spells things sometimes. But this process of SADRAT is exactly how you take an asset from stranger, S, all the way through to secret life controlled target, which is when you are handling them. And then it even includes a step where you distance yourself from that person that you control because it's either in your best interest to get away from them or it's in their best interest to get away from you. And that's where the T in terminate comes from. But the whole SADRAT model is one of those nested processes that helps to dictate how you control or develop an important relationship intentionally. When you are required not to appear as your true self, then that requires that you don some elements of costume. And there are different levels of costume that you can don, different levels of disguise. The department that oversees disguise is called a costume department. Some are very temporary, some are quite permanent, some involve body changes, gaining weight, losing weight, having tattoos erased, having tattoos added. Some involve just throwaway things, fake wigs, fake mustaches, sunglasses, anything you can imagine. But the real objective operationally is just to make sure that you do not appear as your true self within a specific distance. So someone from 40 feet away has to do very little to not appear as themselves. Somebody from 4 feet away has to don quite a lot of costume in order to not look like themselves. The costume department at CIA is it's a room. It's a large room, and it's very much like walking kind of behind set on any TV set. You go in, the people who are working there are highly creative people. They smile, they're high energy. They're not your typical expected closed-door CIA officer. Imagine, flamboyant homosexuals, people of all ages and colors, lots of women, lots of bright colors, lots of creative things just hanging on the wall. Because these people are charged with not only creating a costume that changes your identity, but a costume that has functional practicality as a spy. So not just a jacket that you would never wear, but a jacket that you would never wear that also has hidden pockets, right? And also happens to have a bulletproof vest, and also has a way of being taken off and turned inside out. Like, these are the kind of incredibly creative people that exist, not on the top floor at Langley, but in the basements of Langley. People refer to the CIA headquarters as Langley, Virginia. And that's funny because The actual city it's in is Langley, Virginia, but at headquarters we never call it Langley. We call it headquarters. Even in our written traffic, we refer to it as headquarters, or HQS. It's technically two buildings, what we call an old headquarters building and a new headquarters building. And that's the only overt, non-classified building that I'm able to disclose. There are several buildings that belong to CIA that house CIA officers, but they're all still covert in nature, and their locations are not something that I can disclose. We really are a self-contained unit, almost like a terrarium, where we don't need any support from outside. We can do everything within the confines of CIA, which is exactly how CIA wants to operate, because they have to be so heavily compartmentalized. CIA is a massive city on its own. It's got its own food, its own water sources, it's got its own industry inside. The land that headquarters is on is a large lot of land with a massive parking lot that wraps around it. In fact, it's the parking lot that most people complain about, because it's a huge parking lot, and for you just to get to your office, it's often a 15 or 20-minute walk through this winding, massive parking lot just to get to your office. The size of the parking lot and the way that it's laid out is very much based on security. They don't want cars to get within a certain distance just in case one of the cars or a CIA asset is compromised. Unfortunately, it's not a totally rare occurrence for a CIA officer to be compromised to some sort of adversary or enemy. So they keep cars a certain distance from building walls in case there's a car bomb. We know there are four core levers, four core motivations that drive people to take action. Those four different motivations are reward, ideology, coercion, and ego. Reward means getting what you want, whether that's money or a free cruise or a car. Anything that you get in response to doing what you were told is considered a reward. Ideology is a motivator that comes from within. So whether you're Christian or Jewish, whether you're African American and you were raised to remember, your African roots, or whether you're Latin American and you were raised to remember your Latin roots, all those things fall under the idea of ideology, something that drives you from within. Ego is whatever makes you the person you want the public to see, right? So people often mistake ego with egotism or egotistical, which means that you have an inflated sense of yourself. But in fact, Mother Teresa had an ego. Gandhi had an ego, right? These are people who wanted to represent something publicly, so they made decisions and took actions in the same vein as the public image they wanted to present. Coercion is the weakest. It's the least predictable. And coercion is when you try to force someone to do what you want them to do by using shame or guilt or some other form of overt manipulation. It's much easier and more reliable to get people to take action based on the other three: reward, ideology, or ego. When you try to force them into something, when you try to force them to do something using coercion, you violate their trust and you make it so they know that they can never count on you or trust you ever again. It's much easier to slipstream in and manipulate someone based on their existing ideology or ego than it is to try to force them to your will using coercion. Sexpionage is a term that has become popular because it refers to the act of sex in operations. And that can be, it is often categorized as straight heterosexual sex, female operatives seducing male targets, but it can also be homosexual operations. It can also be group sex operations. It can be any kind of kinky operation that you think of. In real life, sexpionage is a thing and sexpionage works. What's important to understand is that sex in operations is not something that the CIA encourages or condones for its own officers. And the reason is because each CIA officer is an American citizen first, which means they are entitled to all the rights, privileges, and protections of any American citizen. So just like you can't force someone into a sexual act against their will, you can't order someone to execute a sexual act against their will. So CIA very much prides itself on professionalizing all of its officers to keep sex completely separate from operations. That said, foreign countries have learned that American culture and American ideology is one that is oftentimes repressed or intimidated by the concept of sex. For as powerful a country and as wealthy a country as we are, we are still very sexually repressed. So it's a very successful operational tactic for foreign countries to use sexpionage against American targets, because in a foreign country, the individual does not have the same rights and protections that a US citizen has. So perhaps China would order a Chinese intelligence officer to have sex with an American target, or Russia would order it, or Belarus would order it, right? Because they have a completely different set of governing guidelines for their citizens. And they know that American citizens are susceptible to love, acceptance, physical intimacy, and oftentimes we feel guilty about it because we were built on a Christian foundation. The simple fact is that the future outlook for any first world country, and the United States included, is dark. It's bleak. It's difficult. In my assessment, World War III has already started. World War III has been going on for almost a full decade now. When you think about World War I and World War II, the two conflicts were totally different, even though they were only a few decades apart. And when you think about how war has evolved since World War II, to Vietnam, to Desert Shield, Desert Storm, through to even what we did in Afghanistan and Iraq, the nature of war is always evolving. Why would we think World War III would look anything like World War II, nuclear weapons and superpowers? Instead, World War III is based off of common current military doctrine, which the most current military doctrine is the doctrine of proxy war. When you have two vested competitors who are funding proxies to fight on their behalf. What was Syria? What was Libya? What is Yemen? What is Ukraine? What is Israel? These are all countries that the conflict is being funded by outside aggressors who are really trying to compete with each other. It's the Chinese and the Russians and the Indians and the British and the Americans and the Canadians all funding conflict through these poorer third world countries. That is the definition of proxy conflicts, because you can risk international power without risking your own citizenship's lives. This is the world that we live in. Your allies are not your allies because they believe in you. Your allies are your allies because you serve some sort of need that they need. It's very much a business transaction. They have a need, you have a service, and vice versa. I left CIA in 2014 for family reasons. And when I say family reasons, I don't mean something went wrong with my family. I meant I had a family, and I could quickly see that the life CIA wanted for me was not the life that I wanted for my family. My wife, who's also a CIA officer, she and I met at CIA. We met and lived and worked undercover. We had our first child in 2013. And by the time that child was 1 year old, we quickly saw that we were consistently choosing work ahead of parenthood. Even though we had chosen to become parents, the thought that kept me up at night was I was constantly wrestling with, do I pick my career over my child or my child over my career? And the fact that I was having that struggle at night is what cued me in to the reality that CIA didn't care about me. CIA just saw me as another resource, another number, another person to do the job. But my son would never see me that way. My children of the future would never see me as something that's replaceable. Well, when I took that message to my supervisors at CIA and I tried to find a way that I could be a present father, but also be an effective CIA officer, they didn't have any patience for that discussion. It was a very clear either-or choice to them. They were not prepared for my answer, and they were not prepared for the answer of the people who came after me. Because from 2014 to today, CIA has seen a mass exodus of talent, because the old ways of trying to coerce people to stay in your system isn't working for the modern day professional. Now we are choosing to use CIA as a stepping stone. People are choosing to work at CIA because they care about service for a period, but then they also care about building their own resume. They focus on building their career opportunities. They focus on building their wealth. And you can't do any of those things from within the confines of Langley, Virginia. When I first left CIA in 2014, I went into about a 6-month period of time where I was unemployed. And a part of my unemployment was because leaving CIA, you still remain in a cover status, which means that you are still technically unable to disclose your CIA affiliation. However, all of the protections that you had, where the phone numbers to call and references that would say that you worked for them, those references and those protections are gone. There are even scenarios where both the husband and the wife are undercover and married, where the children don't know. And a big part of that is because in that secrecy agreement that you sign, there's also a disclosure where you have to say that you will ask permission from CIA before you disclose your true affiliation to your own children. And that way, you don't tell your 6-year-old that you're a CIA officer and then have them go brag to all their friends. Instead, you're now legally culpable for keeping the secret from your own family. My resume had references and previous work experience that never answered the phone and never responded to emails. So I couldn't even put together a decent resume to get a job. After 6 months of going from a successful CIA officer to an unemployed loser dad with your wife and your kids living in your in-laws' garage, it was a humbling experience. After leaving CIA, I discovered how much the CIA training and the skill sets that they had given me translated into everyday life. Business life, career life, relationships, family, social life. Because what CIA really teaches at its core is psychological frameworks, psychological mental models and systems of thinking that give you an edge, an unfair advantage over your opponent. Well, in normal everyday society, where nobody else has learned these psychological frameworks or processes, if you know them and other people don't, you have an unfair advantage in every element of life. And once I made that connection myself by using my CIA skills to get promoted in a corporate job, using my CIA skills to rapidly grow a new business, using my CIA skills to find and acquire partners and financiers to grow my business. What CIA is most concerned about is the disclosing of its operational secrets, not the secrets that it uses to optimize its own officers. All I needed to do was execute just like a CIA operation against a specific target that had an opportunity that I wanted. And that's how I got into a Fortune 7 company, CVS Health, by essentially cultivating an asset out of a senior executive who gave me a job sight unseen that was senior enough in position that all I had to do was perform. And then once I got into the role, I used more CIA skills to rapidly learn the job, to build relationships and alliances with other people who were already there, to help other people succeed and look good to their boss. And then 4 years later, I was promoted 4 times. It was a rapid experience that showed me how immediately tangible CIA skills were in the corporate setting, the business setting, and everyday life. And that's how I built my company, Everyday Spy, by teaching the skills that optimize CIA officers to work in all elements of life, in all elements of their health, all elements of how they build wealth and run a career, and all elements of their relationships and professional networking. Bleak is still honest, man. If you want to look at the world through a lens of optimism, by all means, do it. But if you want to look at a world where you will have a strategic advantage in the future, you have to see it for what it is. When I look at the future of the United States, it's important to understand 2 things. First, I'm looking at the future of the United States through the lens of a 43-year-old business owner and father of an 11-year-old and a 6-year-old. I have 2 children that aren't even of teenage years yet. And their young professional life won't really start until they're 19 to 21 years old. It's my responsibility now to think of the environment they will have when they are 20 years old. They can't make that decision for themselves. So when I think about the United States 9 years from now, 10 years from now, do I think the United States will be the best place for my 20-year-old son and my 16-year-old daughter to find opportunity? I'm not so sure that that's the case. I'm not so sure that the United States of 10 years from now won't be more divided, less powerful, more controlling from a federal government control of citizenship state. I'm not convinced that that's going to be the best foundation for my children to have opportunities, which is why I plan to leave the United States in the next 5 to 7 years, because I want to give them the opportunity to have success. In my estimation, the best opportunity for anybody who has a business, who has wealth, who's growing wealth or who's growing any kind of business acumen, the best place to grow and succeed in the future is actually less likely to be the United States and more likely to be some other third nation. Until the United States has the time to go through its adolescence. The countries that are on my short list of places to seek opportunity for my children, there are countries in Europe like Portugal or Spain, Italy, Croatia. There are countries in Latin America. We specifically look at Costa Rica. We've looked at Mexico. There are countries that are very wealthy countries like Switzerland or Norway. There are countries all across Africa. These countries are not perfect in and of themselves, but where they are imperfect is different than where we are going in our own imperfection. Because where we are going is more towards a state of chaos and unpredictability, whereas many of these other third world countries or developing countries have very predictable systems. They may be corrupt, but they're predictably corrupt. There are many countries in the world where $10,000 can get you basically anything you want. Where here in the United States, $10,000 in the bank doesn't even qualify you for a home loan, right? How do you deal with that? How do you assess the impact of that on the future state of the family that you're trying to build?
I'm Maven Huffman. I was a pro wrestler for 5 years. Here's everything I'm authorized to tell you about my time in the WWE. Wrestling was ruined for me as a fan the first days and being in a locker room. The moment you're back there and you see, it's just like, you know, I love hot dogs. I don't want to see how they're made. Same with wrestling. It's once you see the ins and outs, once you see behind the, behind the curtain, it's just hard to look at it the same afterwards because you realize it's a show. I don't ever remember thinking that it was real. I always knew it was entertainment, and I was fine with that. Obviously, we're doing something that's athletic. Accidents happen, things can happen while the show is taking place. But for the most part, you hope things go as they are written. A work is when two people are putting on a performance that isn't necessarily the truth. When they're playing characters, when they're putting out a product that is fiction. And the contrary to that is a shoot. And a shoot is when something is 100% real. If you notice, a ref always has an IFB in, and he's getting instructions from the back. Now, mostly the ref is there to keep you on time cues. If you're doing a televised match, you might have 6 minutes for a normal television match, and that's 6 minutes with entrances and your exits. That's 6 minutes altogether. And the ref, when you're out there, the more you wrestle, the more you learn how to have that internal clock. I would work with guys that they could know down to 30 seconds how long they had been in the ring. And the whole time we're out there, though, the ref is leaning down and he's giving us cues. I've also worked with refs. I remember in a pay-per-view in Puerto Rico, Mike Chioda changed the whole match because he had gotten through his IFB from Vince McMahon that they wanted me to cut a promo on the spot because the crowd they were coming at me so much. And I wouldn't have known to do that. I wouldn't have done it because I wouldn't have wanted to get in trouble. But the fact that it was coming from the ref, I knew that it was coming from the back. Once you get in the world as a professional wrestler, once you enter that life, nothing about life that as you've known it will ever be the same again. Every week, you're going to be leaving your house and you're going to be flying out to a new city. You're going to be renting a car and you're going to be wrestling house shows. And what does I mean by house shows? Non-televised shows that are strictly for the house. And after those shows, you're going to be getting in a car with someone that you're on the road with, and you're going to be driving to another city and doing it all over again. And the whole time, you're going to be still trying to eat good, and you're going to be still trying to get workouts in, and you're going to be having a good time. You want to go out young, have a little bit of money. You're going to want to party a little bit. It definitely was an intense schedule. And every month we would have a pay-per-view every Sunday. And this was probably, I would say, over 100 guys and girls. The only thing that we would have taken care of on a weekly basis was our airfare. Once we landed in a town, every expense was on us. Rental car, food, hotel. And those expenses, you're on the road 4 or 5 days, they pile up. I mean, it costs a lot of money to go from town to town. And you might, and I've even done a video about it, you might make $5,000 a week, but it goes quickly if you're spending $1,800 on your road expenses. And then once you get home, you've got to make sure you pay Uncle Sam. And you might have a rude awakening at the end of the year if you don't get that taken care of. All the road is an extension of who you are in real life. If you are a gambler, you're going to find places to go place bets on the road. If you are into strip clubs, like I was at the time, I'm going to find strip clubs where I go when I'm on the road. Because also, you don't have anybody keeping you grounded. You don't have anyone that's probably helping you make better decisions. I know I ran into that problem a lot. When I had a pocket full of money and no one telling me not to go places, I went. Every group has their groupies. Every group has the all too eager female fan base that's there wanting to meet the boys. For wrestlers, they're ring rats. For, I think, comedians, they're chuckers. For NASCAR, they're pit lizards. Every group's got them. Anytime anyone thinks that, you guys are rock stars, you guys have it made. No, we are not rock stars. The ring rats that would show up at our hotels, not necessarily the ones that are showing up for the Rolling Stones back in the day. It was never quite that easy. It wasn't like, I wasn't Ubering sex. I wasn't door dashing ring rats. Anyone that ever wonders the benefits of steroids or questions do they really work? I'll encourage them. I'll show them a picture of my first promo shot when I got into the WWE, and I can picture it in my head as a blue background. And I got on my first cycle, and we were getting good stuff at the time. I had a doctor who was running my blood work and who knew exactly what to put me on to get the look that I wanted. Was I going to go out and win a powerlifting contest? Absolutely not. I didn't care about that. Was I going to look like $1 million? You bet your bottom dollar. And there was a period between my first promo shot and my second promo shot. I think 13 or 14 months passed, and I looked like a completely different human being. But I had been on, my magical mix the whole time I was there was Anavar and Winstrol. For whatever reason, like that stack for me, just it blew me up, and it made me hard, and it made me really lean. And it didn't really matter what I ate. I didn't eat bad at the time, but I could eat whatever I wanted, and I was still going to stay relatively jacked. I'll never say I was forced to do anything. I was encouraged by the office, and I had people from the office come up, and I still remember I'll never forget it. They said, "Have you looked into some of that creatine the boys are on?" Because at the time creatine was, it was a big drug, for years leading up to that. So it was kind of like a code word. And I remember going and asking some of the boys, I was like, "This is what they told me. Am I hearing what I think I'm hearing?" And they were like, "Yeah." And at that point, found a doctor, and it was a doctor a lot of the other guys were using. And like I said, we got some good stuff. It was good. And by the term good stuff, it just wasn't veterinary grade. It was human grade. But there was never a time I was ever worried about failing a drug test. In fact, I failed a couple drug tests and was just told, yeah, just don't let it get out of control. Trust me, at 47, I realize I'm probably going to be, that bill's coming due. I've accepted it, but there's nothing I would change. I did what I did. I own my baggage, and I'm willing to accept the good and the bad that comes with it. In wrestling, there's a before Chris Benoit incident and after. And I was there at a time before. Chris was one of those guys that was backstage, and he was just aggressive, and you just knew he was a guy not to be messed with. But if you had his respect, that was a good place to be, because Chris was going to give you, he was going to help you if you needed it. But if you're not familiar, Chris, I think it was 2007. He strangled his son and his wife, and then, ended his own life. And one of the most tragic just incidents, and I'm not even going to say that wrestling ever endured, that just society had to endure. And for a minute, there's no part of me that you can make me believe that steroids played any role in it. I do believe CTE and head trauma, led to his going off the deep end, or at least assisted in it. And everybody can say that that they saw warning signs. Hindsight's always 20/20. Once the Chris Benoit incidents happened, a lot of things changed, and a lot of things changed for the good. Anytime you can keep guys healthier longer, I'm not going to say it's a bad thing. And if you notice, you don't see the amount of wrestler deaths now like you used to. So it was a good change. If teachers made the money that teachers should make, I probably would have never left. I loved it. I loved the kids. I loved everything about teaching. And in fact, I was a high school baseball coach, and my first year and my second year, I wasn't even going to coach because it took time away from the teaching. I really, really enjoyed it. And it was during my second year of teaching that I found out. And one fateful night on Monday Night Raw, I heard JR say, and I'll never forget it, he said, "Have you ever wanted to be a wrestler?" And I literally felt like he was talking to me. At the time, the WWF was partnering up with MTV, and this is 2001, the infancy of reality shows. They were offering one thing, and that was the chance, the opportunity to sign a contract with the WWF. And to be perfectly honest with you, that's all the coaxing I needed. Well, you actually had to make a hard copy videotape. And I still remember we filmed this tape, and it is atrocious. It's literally cringeworthy. I see it occasionally, and I wish it was at the bottom of the sea, locked in a case that no one could ever see it again. It's atrocious. But my buddy that I moved out to Oregon with, we filmed it as a joke on our way to the gym. We were literally leaving to go to the gym, but we sent it in, and I sent it in with, nothing's going to come of this. Well, how can you think anything's going to come of this? But a couple weeks later, I would find out that there was something coming from it. I think I had about a week or 2 weeks until I had to get myself to New York, to the World at the time, WWF New York, and they were going to be having auditions. Well, I'd never been to New York. I'd never stepped foot in the Big Apple. And I was nervous, to say the least, but I knew, why not? Give it a shot. If nothing else, I'll have a good story. Not thinking for a second that I would get picked for the show. I remember they had a big, heavy bag laying on there. They would have people jump back and forth. And then as soon as you would get done with your calisthenics, they would have you cut a promo. And I had my promo completely memorized. I was going to kill it. My promo was actually going to be a good one. And before I started, as soon as I got done with my jumping jacks or whatever, there was the WWE, the diva, Jacqueline. And I caught eyes with Jackie, and I just threw her a wink, thinking nothing of it. And that shut down the entire panel. They couldn't believe I had the audacity to wink at one of them. And I didn't get to give my promo at that point. At that point, didn't give any of the promo. I had Taz giving it to me. I had Al Snow, asking me, "What are you doing?" And I had Jackie smiling. But I still, and I will always believe that is what got me on the show. Just because that showed an extension of, they're not necessarily looking for a character that you think you are. They're looking for someone that they can pull out of you. And by showing them just that small little bit of charisma or whatever at the time, they knew it was something that they could work with. The first time I saw Vince, he came by Tracks, the training facility. We didn't meet him, and then to get to meet him, to talk to him that day, we might have shook his hands, but the first time I met him, it was towards the tail end of Tough Enough. They took us to his office in Titan Towers. You want to talk about intimidating, walking, at the top floor down this hallway, and you're leading towards Vince's office. It's just, how do I end up here? And I remember distinctly thinking, he's not near as bad or not near as intimidating as people make him out. He was warm, he was inviting, he was very cordial, he smiled a lot, and he was easy to talk to. Things would change once on the road, and once you're making money for Vince, or once you're costing him money. Now, how could you cost him money? If you're taking a slot and you're not getting a pop out of people, you don't have these people reacting. If they're on their phone rather than watching you work, if you're not a draw, if people aren't paying money to come watch you do what you do, you're costing Vince money. Because every time he sends those trucks out to put on a show, every time he rents a venue, every time he pays somebody to be on their television, that's money that he expects to be getting back in the form of your entertainment. So I found out really quickly, Vince viewed us as commodities. It disappoints me that people believe once they have a certain amount of money or a certain level of power that they can mistreat or abuse and use people. That said, I don't know. I don't know the ins and outs. I don't know what is true. I don't know what was consensual. And I do trust the fact that there is a judicial system in this country that hopefully will get to the finally get to some answers. And whatever, I want whatever is coming to the guilty party to come to them. I think we have the iceberg of the story so far. I think we're seeing the tip of it and the body of it that is still yet to be revealed. I think it's going to be drastic. I think more people are going to be uncovered. I think more names are going to be put out. And we're probably going to read, if somehow possible, even more difficult facts about the case. Wrestler's Court it was a fun way on the road to just keep people accountable. I mean, and I've seen people go to court for, usually it's a dumb reason, but the whole time somebody's going to Wrestler's Court, and they try to hold it as a court session. We always, during my time, Undertaker was the guy who was leading it, and you're never going to meet anybody in a wrestling locker room that has more respect attached to them or to their brand or to just who they are than the Undertaker. If somebody finds themselves in Wrestler's Court, 99% of the time, they're guilty of whatever people said they're guilty of. And they're trying to make a point. You know, they're trying to prove a point to people. They're trying to tell them, hey, this happened. Don't let it happen again. Teddy found himself in wrestler's court. This was back when, you know, male enhancement products was just hitting the markets. And Teddy found, you know, through a doctor, found himself with free Viagra. And to help the boys, he was giving them Viagra, but he was charging the boys. So he was making 100% profit off something he was getting for free. And this got out, the boys found out, wait a minute, you're charging us and then you're getting it for free? And it's, again, just fun way to tell them, yeah, just a fun way to tell them, yeah, we're on to you. And that's messed up, you're charging us, you know, but typical penalty was whatever the two guys who were trying the case, whatever they were drinking, just bring a bottle of it, yeah, or two. Yeah, typical penalty was just something fun of that nature. Yeah, there's two ways to get color, and by getting color, I mean you bleed. There is gigging, and you might make a razor blade. I would always make it and put it in I would tape my wrist. I would always put it in my tape job, and then when it was time to get color, I would, boom, take the razor blade out, knowing that my opponent is going to have the ref off, and basically he's taking the action to another side of the ring and making a production about everybody watch over here so that right here I could hit and get my color or start bleeding. Second way to get color is the hard way, and that is when you get hit and you're not supposed to get color or you're not supposed to start bleeding, and you do. And if you wrestle long enough, it will happen. Trust me, it will happen. You won't expect to get color, but most of the time when you get color the hard way, you run with it. You just, because heck, anytime you bleed, it looks more real. So, you know, if you get, you know, I remember I got hit with a trash can lid and the side of it cut my head while I was trying to drive my head into the mat to force more blood out at that point. I'm bleeding already. Might as well try to make it look as good as possible. I was a bad guy. To this day, I only want to wrestle as a bad guy. But fans are known as marks just because they are the target of who we're trying to put a show on, who we're trying to suspend their belief for that limited time that we're out there. We exploit the marks in several ways, whether it's, I remember I used to go to the ring, and as a heel, I would love when I was walking to the ring and I would see a couple, a guy and a girl, because I would always beeline over to them, and I would look at the girl and maybe wink at her or smile at her, knowing I'm pissing him off. I would walk away and just laugh and just giggle. That's how we can exploit the fans. I've been scared before in my life. I've been in, you know, sporting events. I've had to speak in front of people. I've been in just high pressured moments, but nothing compares to how I felt hours before going out for my first wrestling match on SmackDown against Taz. Yeah, I mean, it looked like pajamas. I think it was track pants. I think I had like Nikes on. At the time, I didn't have wrestling gear, but that was part of the plan. You know, they wanted it to look like this is the tough enough kid. He hasn't had time to go get wrestling gear yet. The moment I got backstage and knew that my match one was in the books, and I had, you know, Vince McMahon, and I had, you know, everybody back there that was what wrestling was at the time, you know, standing up and telling me good job, and more importantly, I had Taz, telling me you did a good job. But at that moment, I knew I had made the right decision. in the Royal Rumble 2002, The Undertaker, The Phenom. I mean, the fact that he was allowing me to eliminate him from the Royal Rumble. So in this Rumble, there was a period of time when I was the only legitimate, participant that was still, fighting in this Rumble. And I'm as green, I'm as much of a rookie as you can be. The spot was, he had just finished eliminating the Hardy Boys and he had gotten rid of Lita, and my music hits, I come out, he immediately, dispatches of me. And at a moment of weakness, when his back is turned, I threw and hit a drop kick, which the drop kick was a move I found out early and Tough Enough. I still remember I threw my first 3 drop kicks and Al Snow was like, that's your move, just because I could jump really good at the time. To this day, there's not many things that I don't think I could probably redo. I could probably redo everything a little bit better if you give me a second chance at it. Not this. This is the one thing that, if given the opportunity, I wouldn't want to change a thing about it. It was perfect. I was actually really kicking him, and his momentum and the way he took the bump out of the ring, it was perfect. And then him coming up and just the look of disdain and surprise on his face. I see why people to this day still bring it up. It was a great spot, and it was an iconic moment that I'm thankful that I had. I know I wouldn't have had the career I had without it, and I'm still grateful to Mark for giving me the opportunity. He didn't have to. The day that that I got the call that my services would no longer be requested, they gave me the reasons why I wasn't progressing in ring the way that they had hoped, and I couldn't argue with them. They were 100% right. Do I think I could have gotten to the level they wanted? I mean, obviously, I think I could have, but I understand why they were making that decision, heading in that direction. The hardest part about that was, and I remember like probably 2 or 3 days just not leaving my house. I didn't even go to the gym. And it was because I was scared for the longest time. I was, for 5 years, I'd been known as Maven the Wrestler. If I went anywhere, anybody was introducing me to anybody. Oh, yeah, that's Maven, that's the wrestler. Yeah, he's the wrestler. Or somebody would come up and see me, I'd be out in the bar or whatever, and you're that wrestler. And just having that identity, I loved it. It was great. I loved being known as that. And knowing that was, not only being taken away from me, but being snatched from me, it was tough to deal with. And it was hard knowing that I was going to have to rebuild who I viewed myself as. In time, I would realize I'm always going to be Maven the Wrestler. I'll never step foot in another wrestling ring, doesn't matter. People are still going to view me as Maven the Wrestler. But I had to get to the point to where I was okay with not being that guy anymore. Today I deal with daily headaches. Whether it be my car, whether it be my desk at work, whether it be my house, whether it be my bag I walked into this studio with, I have headache medicine with me in all those locations. I get headaches every day, and I'm not a doctor, but I realize it was probably due to head trauma, maybe some unrecorded concussions that I had. I wake up every morning, and for the first 10 to 20 minutes that I'm walking around, I'm hunched over, and it looks like I was in a minor car accident the day before. And that's just life. That's going to be the way I am the rest of my life. I'm going to deal with back and neck pain for the rest of my life. About 7 years ago, I moved to a stretching routine that I do every day. And I take a good hour of my day every night at the end of my day, and I get down on my floor and I stretch every night, and I have found that helps, and that helps just with my back, with my neck, with everything. Oh my gosh, I had been taking pain medications since my time in the WWE, and I never had a problem getting them. It was funny that I never had to buy an illegal drug ever. You know, I would just go to too many doctors, and anytime I would go to a doctor and show them my list of injuries, they were all too happy to oblige. And I was probably taking, I'd say probably 50 Percocets a day, and then at night using I was mixing somas with Ambien to go to sleep, and I was probably taking 3 Ambien and maybe 3 somas to go to sleep. I wasn't taking it anymore because I wanted to, because it was fun. I was taking it because I needed it, because in order to get up and live a normal life, that's what I needed. I went to rehab before. I went to rehab in 2007, and recognizing the path I was going down, it was just unsuccessful. And when everything happened in 2012, I just I lost everything. I lost my house. My house was foreclosed on. I tried to keep afloat as long as I could, but the HSN job, that was gone, and I had to move. I moved from Florida to New York, and when most people say they're starting from scratch, I really did it, and I had to humble myself. I had to start, and go back to bouncing, and I had to get myself back up to where I am now, and it took some time. I have a weird family structure, and the reason I say weird, my birth mother, and I'll explain to you why I'm categorizing her as my birth mother. I never knew my birth father. My birth mother passed away when I was 2 years old. She committed suicide the day after Christmas in 1978. And not knowing my birth father, that left me almost up in the air. Who was going to take me? Well, my mom's brother and his wife, my aunt and uncle, they had, I don't know if they wanted me, but they were in line, and the lady that would become my mother, I have pictures of her even before she was my mother, when she was my aunt, of her just bathing me, taking me. She always had a love for me. So when the opportunity arose where I needed a family, she was quick to step in. And at 2 years old, I have no memory of that time. So that's always been mom and dad. Yeah, growing up, I was the kid that was staying up till all hours of the night. And the only really WWF we would watch at the time was Saturday night's Main Event, which would come on. I still remember at 11:30. It would stay on till about 1 o'clock, and then at 1 o'clock, NWA would go from 1 to 2. That was every Saturday night I would watch. The first match I ever went to was in the Richmond Coliseum. I was probably 7 or 8 years old. We're looking at 1985-ish. And Ric Flair headlined against Magnum TA in the main event. And probably 17 years later, I would wrestle Ric Flair in Dallas. And I still remember watching Flair come to the ring, and I'm standing in the ring already. And the fact that I went from being that fan that was in the audience to I'm now getting ready to wrestle the guy I went to my first match to watch, it was surreal. And I still remember the referee, Mike Chioda, had to come up and whisper in my ear, "Stop being a fan." And because I'm literally just sitting there in awe watching Ric Flair come to the ring. And what's even crazier is going to Richmond Coliseum to see my first wrestling match. I would one day wrestle in that same arena for the heavyweight championship against Chris Jericho. So it just goes to show life truly does go full circle. Now I work, I love what I do. I work for a company here in the city called Tip Top Capital. We are a capital firm. We help companies that can't get bank funding. We are, kind of a middleman to helping them find alternative sources of funding to help them keep their doors open. And on the side, I have a small little YouTube channel that I've had a little bit of success with, that I'm having a blast with. I don't know how long that train's gonna be on the tracks, but I'm gonna ride it as long as it'll let me. I'm glad that my generation was 20 years ago, because what these guys do now, I couldn't do. They've taken it to a step just beyond what even I thought was possible in the ring. They're so talented now. So I'm glad my time was years ago, and the craziest moves I had to do was just, a missile drop kick.
My name is Kenneth Valentine, a veteran of the United States Secret Service, including protecting 3 sitting presidents, and this is everything that I'm authorized to tell you. Truth is that the Secret Service is anything but secret. Everything we do is on the front page of the news every single day. And so when you have a success, we shrink into the darkness. People don't even think about you. If you have a failure, it's front page news. The Butler, Pennsylvania shooting has been difficult on many fronts. We failed, the Secret Service failed. The first and foremost is that one person died inside a secured event. 3 other people, including former president, were wounded inside that event. There's just no way you can't use the word failure when shots are fired into what is supposed to be a secured venue. I was actually clued in by a text from multiple agents, because I was in the hospital with my mother who was about to have open heart surgery, and I had to commandeer the TV in the room from her bedside roommate and put it on a news show to pick up what was happening. I have to assume that we didn't follow our own protocol, that we did not pay attention to detail, which is one of the mantras of the Presidential Protection Detail, is to pay attention to detail. And that's one of the failures that I see with Butler, is not only was he able to get off rounds, but he was able to focus in, to see the protectee from outside the venue, and to put those shots in with some accuracy. So that's actually multiple failures. You don't want to be reacting to the sound of gunshot, because those bullets have already whizzed past if you hear it. When prevention doesn't work and now you're reacting, your job is to cover the protectee and then to evacuate that protectee. And the cover looked outstanding. The reaction by the detail was very good. They were very fast. It was fearless, as it should be. Their training kicked in, and they did exactly what we trained to do, which is get on top of that protectee and put them down. Put them down behind some assets and resources where they can't take another intentional, focused shot at the protectee. There are a myriad of ways that could have been and should have been prevented that weren't that day. Shipping containers blocking line of sight. You can't use a shipping container, which is going to stop the bullets. Could you use a flag? Could you use a banner? Could you turn that stage to where the back of the stage is now facing that threat zone, that maybe you don't have all the resources to post, but you could cant the stage such that it takes away that line of sight. And now your line of sight is an empty field. Bulletproof glass. We use that at the National Lighting of the Christmas Tree every year for outdoor events. And so those resources are there. I think the investigation's going to have to ask those hard questions as to why weren't those kind of resources used for this event. A lot of what you see is kind of like the tip of the iceberg. You saw the protective detail around President Trump, and they're the ones in the suits that reacted and jumped on top of him and then tried to effect that getaway from the scene. You also saw counter assault team members who came out from their position kind of out of sight at a tactical position, but now they've come out of that tactical position into actual tactics. You saw them on stage because they had the helmets and the black gear. They collaborate and train with Navy SEALs, with Delta, with FBI HRT. So it's a very specialized team. They're highly trained. The images that the media shows over and over on the rooftop was our counter sniper units. So if I'm not mistaken, that's the first round one of our United States Secret Service counter snipers have ever fired at another human being. And it was a perfect shot. The evacuation looked like it met with some difficulty, and part of the problem was the protectee himself. President Trump had the for him, the presence of mind to signal to the American people that I'm okay and that we're going to win this battle. Now that's great. That gave me some relief watching from my mom's hospital room. So him sticking his head up high and exposing himself was a big problem that day. And what you're looking for is compliance. You know, ideally you would want to double them over and walk them out, and hopefully they assist you in that endeavor. If they don't, and I suspect what the training is now going to say is, don't expect their help. Immobilize them and get them prone. If you have to, carry them out. The way I was trained is you put your hand on the back of their head, and with one arm around their waist, if you push their head forward, they will comply, and they will start moving forward. And the same if you pull them backwards, they really come under your control at that point if you get that working. It's amazingly easy, even if you have to, you know, make them uncomfortable or even hurt them a little bit in the process. That is more important. "9/11, hard for me to let go of, and I was on the first of 2 coveted days off in a row, and then my pager went off, and it was my boss. I'm at home, I'm ready to go. I said, if you need me to do something, I'm your guy, let's go. And he said, you know what, pack a bag and stand by. And I said, yes, sir. And I was angry, I might have hit something. I got a 4th page, and they said, get to the White House immediately. Close to midnight, we were rotating through our posts, and we get the crackle over the radio saying, we've got an inbound aircraft. You know, I immediately think of a jumbo passenger jet full of gas. We got an altitude, we got a direction of travel, and we got a speed, and it was on a high-speed mission directly for the White House. So we did not have minutes, we had more like seconds. But the President and the First Lady had been released to go upstairs to the residence for the night. And so once their evacuation was complete, my job was to stay and fight, and then to be the point when they made their reentry. The problem was we weren't talking about a ground attack. I was left behind with a machine gun, a pistol, a radio, and a gas mask to fight what I thought was a jumbo jet that was going to crash the house any second. You know, it wasn't a good time to argue. The circumstances are different. You just suck it up and do it. And so I covered that evacuation, and then I looked on the ground floor of the White House. You know, where might I survive? You know, what if it hits at the wrong angle and there's a chance? Where would that chance be? And it was the west wall of the original White House. It has a wide archway. And I thought, if I stand in this archway and the plane hits just right and the fireball doesn't burn me alive, maybe, just maybe, there's a chance that I survive this. And so I went and stood in that archway with all my gear, my stuff, and I had what seemed like an eternity to stand there and ponder my own demise. But I remember being at great peace, and I just thought, well, I guess this is how it ends. And I've seen what happens when these big planes hit these buildings, and I knew that the wingspan of a 747 was wider than the White House itself, so it was probably all going down, and everything was going to be burned. I thought about my wife for a second, and I said, well, Lord, here I come, I'm ready. You know, they're going to put a plaque for me up over at headquarters, and that's just all she wrote. And it wasn't too much longer that we got the crackle back on the radio that the plane had been identified, that there was no emergency, that we could unevacuate the White House. He just wasn't on the right frequency, and he didn't have his transponder turned on, so they just had no way to identify him without visually identifying him. That Air Force pilot came a lot closer to dying that night than I did, but I sure didn't know that at the time. Part of training to be a presidential or vice presidential agent is being shot at, and you need to know what that sounds like. You need to know what it feels like even. They absolutely light you up with paintballs and with plastic paint bullets and shot from real weapons, but if you do it wrong, you can count on being shot. And if you stick your head up where it shouldn't be stuck up, you're going to taste some of that paintball in your mouth, because the instructors are just that good with those weapons. And so they know the mistakes that agents are going to make in training. They've seen it all before. Being shot at is no fun, I can tell you that. And that really drives you as a Secret Service agent to bolster up prevention, because we don't want to be shot at. We want to prevent the shots from happening in the first place. So you get hit, you pay for it. It hurts, and you've got those bruises for for a few weeks to think about what you did wrong. The very first thing that special agents have to do is go through a 2-week training course in Washington, D.C. And this is really your intro course to being a part of the Secret Service family. The second step is a trip to Glencoe, Georgia, to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. You learn about defensive driving, you learn about shooting and control tactics, handcuffing, a little bit of fighting, a little bit of federal law enforcement in terms of surveillance and arrest, and a lot of classroom. And then you're sent to the Secret Service Training School, just outside of DC. And this is where the road gets a little rougher. We start with 24. Typically, most make it. In my class, 19 out of the 24 made it. A lot of times we would have a schedule that said that the next day is all classroom, and that's a sort of a relaxing thing to know ahead of time that hey, it's all classroom. You can come dressed in your fatigues with your polo, and we're just going to be in the classroom all day. And that never seemed to work out. We would show up and the instructor would be in his workout attire, shorts and a t-shirts, and he says, "What are y'all doing dressed in those clothes? Get your PT gear on now and let's go." As our lead instructor, we had a gentleman who was a former Marine Corps officer who then had served in the CIA. He'd been in the Secret Service for a good while. He'd been on the Presidential Protection Detail, and he pushed us hard. The training lasts about 6 months. Between those 3 stops in D.C. down to Glencoe, Georgia, and back to D.C. is about 6 months. 1 week where you're learning about constitutional law, and then at the end of the day, you're headed to the long range to shoot long guns. And we would shoot everything from pistols, and that could be a 9mm, 40mm, 38 special, up to MP5s and M4s, and then our snipers, who come from our uniform division, have sniper type rifles, which are much bigger and longer. Look, I was the freak. I showed up there with right eye dominant, but I closed my right eye, and so what they worked with me because I was looking down the barrel of a pistol with my left eye, and I had just made it work all these years, but it was a bad habit, and so they moved me to a different stance, more of an open stance, and keeping both eyes open, and that was what ended up working for me. We missed those Uzis. Those were great guns. When I came into the Secret Service, that was the standard long gun for agents. And so we were all trained on the Uzi. We had that outstanding Samsonite briefcase with the Uzi in it, and we all got trained on that. But it got replaced by the MP5 probably back in the early 2000s. One of the funner parts of training was just the familiarization courses that we would be put through. And one of those, when I was on the Presidential Protection Detail, was a familiarization with the sounds. They took us out to Fort Meade, and they fired rounds over our head from various weapons. And so we got to hear what an M4 sounds like when 5.56 rounds are going over your head, or what an AK-47 rounds sound like when they're going over your head, or what a 50 cal sniper rifle sounds like when those rounds are cracking over. And very distinct sounds. You don't forget them once you've heard them, but they also taught you how to take an AK-47 apart and put it back together. What do you want to do if you want to disable a weapon that an assailant dropped and left behind, and render it safe? Part of the training that we received was called control tactics. So control tactics includes hand-to-hand type exercises and combat, if you will, to knife fights, and then how to disarm somebody with a weapon. And so all of that goes into play. We start in a mat room, and you've got a rubber knife or a rubber gun, and you're working it out. You're doing it wrong 6 times to get it right 1 time, and now we've got it. Let's do it again. And these instructors, typically all a black belt in some sort of discipline, whether it's jiu-jitsu or Kempo karate or taekwondo. And so we're really getting a hodgepodge of all of those things. A lot of Gracie jiu-jitsu moves that really do work well, because we don't want to stay and fight. We want to subdue, we want to bring someone into compliance, and then we need to shove off and move. We have an axiom that we say maximum to the protectee, minimum to the problem. You know what? Anyone can win any fight any day. And a lot of that comes back to your training and how well you train. But if you're caught off guard, if you're not mentally prepared, if you're not physically prepared, you're probably going to lose. Everyone thinks that somehow we're a spy agency or an intelligence agency, and it's really quite the opposite. We are strictly law enforcement. We use intelligence. We try to gain intelligence, but that's usually handed to us. And so we certainly need intelligence about protective efforts, about threats against the president. Attempts on the president are rare, but certainly people who would like to make an attempt are not rare. We've seen celebrities make threats, and John Wilkes Booth was probably the most famous actor in America. Everyone knew who he was at that play that night, and he was allowed to walk backstage and have access to the presidential box because of who he was. There was one comedian who displayed the severed head of a president and was interviewed about that. We're going to talk to that person and find out, what's the intent here? If someone is squawking and talking, be it on the internet or at a bar or with friends and family about their intent to do harm to one of our protectees, we investigate that. We investigate every single one of those. How serious were you? Were you drunk? Were you off your medication? What was the cause of you making that threat? We keep records on those. We track them. We educate ourselves on them. And I don't know if there's a Secret Service agent alive who hadn't been at a party or a bar or somewhere. Even family members will say things that, depending on who the president is or what their political leanings were, that they would say something inappropriate. So yeah, I've been in the presence of people who've said some really stupid things and either steer the conversation the other way because they don't know I'm an agent, or just tell them flat out, hey, you need to stop before you say something you're going to regret. Even the patients at these mental institutions were given access to telephones at different times of the day, and we knew some of them by name and I knew several of them by voice, because every time they got unfettered access to a telephone, they would call our office, and they would start down this road, and they would talk into our telephone recording until it ran out of tape, and talking about, I want to kill the president, I want to do this, I want to do that, and they'd email whitehouse.gov, I'm going to kill the president. People would just do stupid things, and there is a line to be crossed. It's a little blurry, but once you've crossed it, you're going to get interviewed. Secret Service protects the sitting U.S. president, their family, the sitting U.S. vice president and their family, former presidents of the United States, and then visiting heads of state. I think right now the Secret Service is protecting upwards of 40 people. But on any given day, heads of state visit the United States. Certainly when the UN General Assembly is in session, it becomes hundreds of people. Trust in the Secret Service is critical, not only trust between the agents and the hierarchy, but also trust with your protectee. So if your protectee doesn't trust you, that's a huge problem. And it's a big reason why in the early 90s, when President Clinton went through the Monica Lewinsky scandal and all that, the Secret Service was subpoenaed to testify during that scandal, and we fought it. There's not a non-disclosure for embarrassing information, but that's where agents have to kind of earn their keep. They have to be worthy of trust and confidence, that they're not going to, go off telling these stories and, divulging things. We lost, so we did have to testify. But we want to be able to have and enjoy that kind of trust with the protectees, where they can know that they can be themselves, that they can do the job that they've been elected to do. I came into the Clinton administration during his last year, and I was the junior guy who was told to shut up and keep your head down, and you need to figure out why you're here first. And so President Clinton really didn't get out and do a whole lot during that last year. Went on a few trips with him, but wouldn't say that I got to know him all that well. Probably gotten to know him better since he is a former president. President George W. Bush, I was there for his first 4 years, and that's when I really started making strides within the detail in terms of your advance preparation. So you're building your resume the whole time, working your way up to being a lead advance agent. I ran with him. He certainly appreciated the agents who were assigned to run with him because he was a heck of a runner. And so those agents stood out to him. But it wasn't like a buddy kind of thing. We had a job to do. He had a job to do. He had some very good friends, and they were not agents. So President Obama was different, though, because I was assigned to him when he was still a senator. And I was already a senior agent. I had already done the president's detail with 2 other presidents. We would go out for 3 weeks and then come back for 3 weeks. And so I came back from being with him, and my wife mysteriously becomes pregnant right after I get home. And I'm going out on my 3-week tour with Senator Obama, and it's time for my wife's ultrasound to find out if it's a boy or girl. And we always found out with all 5 kids. We're not on Air Force One, we're on a little private jet that somebody rented for him. There's a lot more intimacy when it's like that. And so I told this agent who was single with no kids, I said, hey, we're having another girl in the back of this little bitty plane. The senator had 2 staffers on the plane with him. And Reggie Love was one of them. Reggie hears this. He just turns around and he says, hey, Barack, Kim's having another girl. Not where I wanted the conversation to go. Well, I don't really want to have these kind of personal conversations with any of the protectees because we're trying to keep it professional. And so he turns around and he says, you're having another girl, huh? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, well, how many does that make? I struggled with that for just a nanosecond because I didn't want to lie to him, but I didn't want to not tell him the whole truth. So I said, well, sir, this will be number 5, 3 boys, 2 girls. And he was so taken aback by that number, 5 kids, and he held up his hand and he said, 5? Kind of forgot where I was for a second. And I said, yes, sir, 5. And we're pretty sure this last one, your fault. And in my mind, I'm thinking back to being gone for 3 weeks and coming home and, happy to be home, all that kind of stuff. And he was like, well, I don't know what to do with that, but as long as I'm not paying for college, congratulations. So the point of all that is that I didn't have favorites necessarily, but the familiarity was different with each of those. And so Senator Obama gets elected president. I get promoted to go back to the president's detail at the same time. I'll never forget the first time he saw me when I was back. And so big reunion, big hug, and there's just that familiarity. Whereas, these other 200 people that he sees, on a daily or weekly basis, there's just no frame of reference. But for me, I think it went back to that day on the plane when he thought I was accusing him of being the father of my kids. We dress for success in a little different way, and we trying to in kind of like a chameleon, fit in with our environment so that the casual observer, maybe from a distance, doesn't know, is that a Secret Service agent or is that a high-ranking department official? The special agents typically wear suits, and the truth is the suits, they don't help you buy those suits. So Joe Banks had a, buy one, get 22 free, and so I had a bunch of Joe Banks suits for a while. The wear and tear on the suits is immense. I would wear holes where the gun leather, hit my hip. I would wear a hole in my pants, and then in my jacket, there would be a hole where the hammer was covered. So sunglasses if it's sunny, or if you just don't want your eye gaze to be detectable. The bulletproof vest was a requirement. You've got your issued sidearm, and we fluctuated in caliber, maybe depending on the low bidder, I don't know, but it was either a SIG or a Glock, and a 9 or a 40 back to 9. You would carry extra ammo, so at least 1 extra magazine. Most agents carried at least 2 extra. We all carry the same gun. We all carry the same ammo, so that if you are out of ammo, you can get more from a partner or teammate. If there's a gun on the floor, you can pick it up and use it because you've been trained on that weapon. You've got handcuffs. You've got an issued extendable baton and a flashlight, and that was kind of minimal equipment. everyone assigned to the president's detail had some kind of cool flashlight. They didn't issue those things, so you had to buy your own, and so that it was another way to kind of be cool, is to have the latest and greatest flashlight that you spent more than your salary on, to have at your disposal in case the lights go out and we're in a pickle. A lot of times agents were encouraged to carry an IFAC kit, and so it's just a trauma kit that, in case you are shot or your protectee is bleeding, that you've got it, immediate access to first aid equipment, a tourniquet, something to cover that wound and start that medical treatment immediately. So we also carried pagers back in the day, which then transitioned to a phone and a radio. You always had a radio. Some guys would carry backup batteries to radios because they didn't always work that well. I hope they got that worked out by now. But there's information that you carry with you just in case that I wouldn't be comfortable revealing. But there are diagrams and information about the president, about our plans, about our means and methods. But that's about all I'm authorized to divulge there. If a Secret Service agent loses equipment, it's a big deal. Certainly a weapon or even a baton. Maybe the worst thing of all that an agent can lose is their PIN. Because if you lose your PIN, now someone can impersonate you just by virtue of wearing that PIN. Now, it won't get you access to too many places, but we protect those, we number them. If you lose one, it goes out to the entire Secret Service to say, hey, Valentine lost his blue pin number, 44221, and now it's entered into the National Criminal Information Database as a lost item if it's recovered. When agents would wobble a little bit on not blending or fitting in, then yeah, I'd call them out for it. In one specific instance, a pair of white Oakley big frame sunglasses that just didn't fit the circumstance. I went up to this agent and I said, you really thought long and hard about it and decided to wear those sunglasses anyway? And he said, hey, come on, man, my mom said these are pretty cool. And I said, well, that should have been your first sign that they don't work. So I don't want to see them again. There's not a lot that I'm authorized to say about the car. I know a lot of people call it the Beast, but I can tell you, we did not refer to that car as the Beast. I think that was a media invention that kind of caught on. In fact, when I was on the president's detail, we took delivery of the first upgraded car that they refer to as the Beast. And every car that we used prior to that time was a real car that was pulled off the line in Detroit, was likely sawed in half, stretched, and then armored it. In the process, the car now weighs too much for the frame. The tires won't support it, the suspension won't carry it, the brakes won't stop it, and the engine won't pull it. Those were not ideal. In fact, the first time I drove the president was in an old style car. I missed the drop-off point by about 12 feet because I'm standing on the brakes and the car won't stop. And, that's just the way it was. You needed some lead-up time to get that thing rolling, and so it just wasn't ideal. Those upgraded cars that we've had since about 2000 are really not a car at all. It's an armored system that looks like a car, much more like a tank that's got a plastic car wrapped around it. And so it's got a Cadillac dash, it's got Cadillac furnishings on the inside, it's got a nice steering wheel, but the workings of that car actually work. You step on the gas and that thing goes. I mean, it's got a huge engine in it. The tires support it. I mean, it really is quite a beast in terms of its capability, but it does have a downside, and it does not fly and it does not float. We get some really funny looks when we're in transport mode without him because we don't have our own gas pumps. We take it to a local gas station and put high octane gas in that thing, and people are driving by looking at us and taking pictures and getting a kick out of the fact that they think that might be the president's car, getting gassed up at the Chevron oil station. The only people authorized to drive that car are the Presidential Protective Detail agents who are currently assigned to the transportation section. We've built out a program called the Protective Operations Driving Course, and it's not nothing. It's a tough course. It's a 2-week class that you have to pass in order to remain in that section and to be eligible to drive with the president in the car. We always travel with a mechanic. And it's one of the coolest things I thought about the President's detail. The mechanics are not agents; they're protective support technicians. That's their title, and we recruit them from the ranks of certified mechanics out there. And these guys are certified GM, ASE certified mechanics who are also trained and carry weapons. So in their toolbox, they've got a gun. You know, they put the suit on. They have to qualify with the weapons. They have to requalify with the weapons, you know, all the time. And we rely on them very heavily. But they are one of the greatest assets we have that people have no idea. And they're in every motorcade. So if the car breaks down, they're assessing it immediately. And one time we were simply driving from the Air Force Base where we landed, taking the cars to the hotel. And I was driving the limo, and it just broke down and stopped. And I called the mechanic on the radio, and I said, "Hey, the car." And we got practically a motorcade with a police escort getting the cars from the airport to the hotel. And the mechanic came up and assessed, and he said, "Hey, it's the alternator." And this mechanic had that alternator swapped out in minutes. You know, if we hadn't told anyone, no one would have known. The second inauguration of President George W. Bush and the Capitol to the White House, we rode part of the time, we walked part of the time. We would practice and rehearse being shot at, being, you know, having rocks and all kinds of things thrown at you, and we would practice, what are we gonna do? You're there really to prevent someone from getting too close to the car. On that day, people started throwing, we came to a certain group of people that were, you know, throwing snowballs, and some of them had rocks in them. Someone threw a fish. I don't know if it was a goldfish or you know, something they bought at the store or what. But you know, people do stupid things out there. And I remember driving the limo for President Bush, and you know, people turn around and moon you or do weird things, hold up crazy signs. But you know, not threatening, just kind of silly. Air Force One, for me, was a total joy because every time you got back to Air Force One, you knew you could relax for just a minute. You know, everyone could loosen their tie a little bit and relax. And if it was a long flight, you know, the agents could even catch a nap, could take that vest off and air out a little bit, you know, and let your hair down just a little bit. The food was outstanding as well. Funny thing was, I remember leaving the ranch kind of early on in my presidential career, and thinking, I wonder what we're going to eat on the plane, because we're riding from Texas back to DC, and it's during a mealtime, so we're about to be treated to a pretty cool meal. And it was hot dogs and potato chips. And I remember thinking, what the heck, man? Who ordered this? Well, it turned out that's what the president wanted, so that's what everyone got. A couple of weeks after the trip, you got a bill. And you had to pay for all the food that was consumed on the plane. And so they would add up all the food, everything that was consumed on a trip was weighed and measured, and they added that up, divided it by the number of people traveling on the plane, and you got a bill. So that was a little bit of a shocker for me coming in, just assuming that, you know, that the G's going to take care of you and you got all this good stuff. Stairs are always a problem and an issue, and I'll tell you why. You know, you see a president stumble, you see them, you know, unsure. Well, part of it is that it's a different set of stairs getting up there almost every time, unless they're at Andrews. All of the ones that let the president in that upper door, the door with the presidential seal on it, the door that creates that iconic opportunity to turn around and wave to the country. The problem is those stairs are built into a truck. And so you have to drive a stair truck up to Air Force One, and they tend to be slippery when wet or cold. Air Force One has built-in stairs, a set of rear built-in stairs that, you wouldn't want the president to walk up, and then it has a front set of stairs that can fold down. That camera shot is blocked by the motorcade, by people that are kind of clogging up that view. So Air Force One is a great way to go, but it's not the best way to go, because the press plane is absolutely the best way to travel. They have so much freedom on that plane, and so much food, and it's just a lighter environment. And it's a beautiful thing, because we will buy seats on that plane, and the plane is only partially filled, and the press knows how to have fun. I mean, they have a great time. There's a lot of laughter, and agents who know will choose to go over on the press plane. I was still in my mom's hospital room thinking this is going to change the rest of my life, because I am branded as a former Secret Service agent, as a retired agent. And, when people ask you, what do you do? And I say, I'm a retired Secret Service agent. Now it's going to be about Butler. They don't care about the books. They don't care about the speeches. They don't care about the leadership training. They want to know what happened at Butler. And I knew, standing there in my mom's hospital room, that this was going to change the conversation, not this week, not for the next month or year, but for the rest of my life. It's going to be about what happened at Butler. President Trump was the sitting president for 4 years. He was defeated in an election, and now he's coming back running again. And you don't typically see that. When we look at protecting people, there's a lot of anger pointed toward our politicians, in conjunction with the temperature of our country, should have signaled to leadership that this is a big deal. Butler's ultimate failure, in my opinion, is going to go back to leadership. Certainly we saw the Secret Service director come and testify and not give satisfactory answers to some pretty simple questions. And it goes above that to the Department of Homeland Security, and I don't think we've seen anyone from the Department of Homeland Security be pressed on their leadership of the Secret Service. And ever since Secret Service moved from Treasury to DHS in the wake of 9/11, I think the culture of the Secret Service has been impacted by that move. And autonomy for the Secret Service means that we have the ability to innovate and the ability to lead. When you get to dictate where your protectee goes, especially given a little bit of time, you can do a whole lot to render that place safe. And so whether it's the president going golfing or going for a run, with a little bit of heads up, we can deploy assets and literally clear an area for them to operate in that's safe and secure. A lot of people have asked me recently about the future of the Secret Service, and do you see a bright future for the Secret Service? And my answer is going to be yes. Every time something happens that makes them reassess, they will come back stronger. There's no excuse for error, for failure, but their success is going to be tied to their ability to get out of DHS and get back to Treasury Department. And then, let's get us back to the time when, 1 in 10,000 applicants was accepted for the job. And so I started as a special agent in 1996 and retired in 2020. Secret Service has mandatory retirement at 57, and I think it used to be 55. It got bumped to 57, but at 57, you're put to pasture and you can go do something else. I think there's a lot of agents that their identity is so wrapped up in that whole Secret Service thing, or maybe that whole law enforcement thing, the badge, is their whole identity. And boy, I was really ready. After 24 years, I let go of that pretty easily. I think I was ready. There is a jading that happens too, and you go into a restaurant, and after doing it one way for 24 years, that's a little hard to give up. And so my wife will point out if I'm being hypervigilant about our surroundings, about the exit doors, about who's coming in, and looking them over and assessing what's going on. And that's my cue that okay, I need to calm down, or I need to relax a little bit. I've tried to get better about that, but I think it's part of your DNA at this point. I think you've been changed, and so I just go into scenarios and situations, and given the opportunity, I do think about, well, If this breaks bad, I'll sit in church and think, if somebody comes in here shooting the place up, what are we going to do? I'm not sure I'll ever recover from that. I'm not sure I need to, but it does change you. And it makes you a pretty formidable asset to a company or to, whoever's going to hire you in the afterlife. But these days, my life is consumed with reliving the past through leadership training and teaching and coaching and mentoring. And so on the side, I'm writing books and going out and giving speeches, but leadership is my focus now. The first book that I wrote was called Cheating Death, which was really a combination of letters to my kids combined with advice and then stories from the Secret Service. And the second book is really an offshoot of the first book. It's called Staying Sharp. It'll be out in February.
Hi, I'm a producer and Authorized account. If you enjoyed this video, then please subscribe and comment with more topics that you'd like us to cover in this series.